Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Indigenous Food Systems Gathering, hosted by the Center for Indigenous Health and also in partnership with the Bloomberg American Health Initiative. She Ashley White Yanishya, Kazatlan Inishli, Maideshki Nivashichin, Tobahan Dashache Do Toswatni Dashanele. Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley White. I am many goats, born for Coyote Pass. I'm a proud Dene woman. I'm coming from the Navajo Reservation. And aside from being a res girl, I am also the Center for Indigenous Health program coordinator for the education and training team. Thank you for having here and thank you for being here. Online folks, I do want to mention online, we're going to have about over 100 people. So, big crowd. Woo. Today, as we gather in celebration of Native American Heritage Month and in recognition of Veterans Day, we began our day in a good way with a traditional blessing from our elder in relationship for the Baltimore hub of the center, Mr. Ron Lessard. Mr. Lessard is a U.S. Air Force veteran who has served under the 4 White House administrations, contributing greatly to the advancement of American Indian education. Ron, thank you for grounding us as we begin.
Thank you, Ashley. Can everyone hear okay? I like to offer a blessing, and you can stand or sit, whatever is comfortable for you and how you believe. Tankashla, grandfather, creator, we thank you for this day, Tankashla. Bless all the families, the veterans' and their families, for the sacrifice they have given. And today is a special day as we honor them. I want to thank the coordinators and bless the coordinators and all the people that have attended, that they come here in a good way, with a good heart, and as we share and discuss this very important issue of indigenous foods for our children and family and communities. And we thank you, Tankashila, for that. We want to thank Tankashila, creator, for the elements that have given us indigenous foods. We want to thank the Mother Earth. We want to thank the Father Son. I want to thank our sky. We want to thank the Grandmother Moon. We want to thank all the animals that have come on this earth. Without these elements, we wouldn't have indigenous foods. We want to thank Tankasha, our grandfather, for the wind and the rain that bring these foods to us. And we want to thank all the little pollinators that take those seeds and pollinate the earth. So we thank you for that, Tankashla. We thank you for this day. This is a very important issue, and we thank everyone for being here. Tankashla, we ask you to bless them in their words, that they can do this work for the benefit of our children and our families, and that as they leave, they can go back to their homes in a safe way and carry this word, carry the knowledge with them. And we want to thank all those speakers that will be here today to provide and share their knowledge with us. So we thank you, Tankashila, for this day. We thank you for this event. We thank you for all the people that are attending, and we bless you. We ask for your blessings. Tankashila, grandfather, thank you. Thank you, Tankashila, grandfather. Taho, matakoyasun.
Go ahead, Ron. Next, we're going to go into our land acknowledgement. And this is going to be shared by Shane Bryan, who serves the Partnership and Engagement Program Manager with the Bloomberg American Health Initiative. Shane? floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Yeah, well, hey, why not? Why not? It's still early. Thank you, Ashley, and to the center. It's truly a pleasure to be a partner with you all, not just at this event, but throughout the year as we promote our Bloomberg American Health Fellowship program that provides a full scholarship for folks to get their master's or doctorate in public health, and you'll hear more about that a little bit later. But for the land acknowledgement, we do humbly acknowledge that we are all located on the traditional and contemporary homelands of Indigenous peoples. Together, we acknowledge the history of genocide and ongoing systemic inequities while respecting treaties made on this territory as a step towards reconciliation and strengthening relations with Indigenous peoples. We give thanks to the past, present, and future stewards of this land and respect all tribal nations' sovereignty and right to self-determination. We aim to hold ourselves accountable to tribal nations. We also invite you all here in person and online to recognize the lands of Indigenous peoples in which you reside. Thank you.
Thank you again, Shane, for centering us in the lands of the people. At this time, we're going to hear some words of welcome from the leadership of both the Center for Indigenous Health and Bloomberg Health Initiative. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Walls, co-director of the Center for Indigenous Health and member of the Boys Fort and Couchiching Anishinaabe, and Dr. Josh Sharfstein, Vice Dean for Public Health Practice and Community Engagement and Director of BAHI. Ms. Walls, Dr. Walls.
Usually Josh has a skit with people if he's standing next to them, but we didn't plan a skit, so we're going to say separate words. Bujun and Denue Magni Duke. How y'all doing? Energy online. Give us some hearts online. I can see you there. It's so wonderful to be here today. It's a privilege to be here. Some of us flew in yesterday, and it was okay for me, but I saw some pretty distraught folks in the airport, so I'm really grateful to be here. Everyone, we are here today online and in person to experience just a sampling, just a taste of the brilliance and the beauty and the hope that lies in Indigenous approaches to our food systems. The irony of us gathering around the topic of food is not lost on me in this time. We planned this summit, this mini summit we're calling it, because the Bloomberg American Health Initiative has some big summits. This is a mini version. Several months ago, before we knew what might play out over the past 4 or 5 weeks. And to think about nutrition in a new way and to have the privilege of space to imagine a new food system is something, as I said, that's ironic in the wake of federal government shutdown that has left so many families more stressed about food, more hungry. And in the case of American Indian families, we know that so many of our relatives rely on federal benefits like SNAP and FDIPR to feed their families. It's been a very stressful time. The federal government has a government-to-government relationship with tribes, and as part of that federal trust responsibility is supposed to supply certain benefits, SNAP and FDIPR among them. So you can imagine when the federal government shuts down how our communities are left especially at risk for hunger and food insecurity beyond the everyday norm. And this is compelling given research in part published by Dr. Tara Maudrie, who will speak later, that shows that in some cases 20, 25%, up to 80% of some American Indian communities rely on these federal benefits to eat. All of that complexity and hardship and stress aside, one thing I know for sure as a faculty member here and as part of the Bloomberg American Health Initiative focused on food systems for health is that our American food system is broken. We know this to be true. The way that we eat, the way that we fail to connect to the foods that we consume, the way that food production happens and how much waste occurs, the impact on the environment, layers upon layers of the system that are meant to nourish us are causing so much harm and sickness. It need not be that way, by the way. It feels dark, but let's go back up. I'm certain that today you will get glimmers of the wisdom of our original instructions as Indigenous peoples of these lands that we now call the United States. There are solutions out there, and many of them, I believe, are embedded in Indigenous value systems. They are literal instructions to be well-grounded in reconnecting to our foodways, to each other. The energy here in the room, folks, for the online crowd, when people get to reconnect, is so life-affirming and life-giving. That reconnection to our foodways is possible too. That hope is something that will touch your spirit today, and you'll actually get some nourishment in a variety of forms as well. I encourage you to play with what you learn throughout this brief morning and afternoon together. And maybe you even go out next spring and grow just a tiny bit of your own food and think about this day and some of the teachings you'll receive. Tribes are innovating in food sovereignty spaces in ways that astonish me. I am constantly learning. They are feeding their own communities in spite of the broken systems around them. They are inspiring, and my friends, this spiritual journey that we're on together is one that you'll just get to, as I said, sample today, and you are so welcomed here, and I hope that you have such an enjoyable time. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague here, Dr. Josh Sharfstein.
Well, that was tremendous, Dr. Walls. And let me just say, it is an honor to be here with you all. I'm Josh Sharfstein, the director of the Bloomberg American Health Initiative, and we have other members of the Bloomberg American Health Initiative team here, including Shane, Michelle.
And your dad.
I follow, yeah. Sorry. I was going to say, my dad is in the back. He is an affiliate faculty member in the Department of Mental Health here for a seminar this morning, but followed the scent down to the room. You know, we have had a very close relationship with the Center for Indigenous Health at the Bloomberg American Health Initiative right from the beginning. And I wish I could say that entirely that was because of Michelle and my vision for American Health, but I also have to give a fair amount of credit to Allison Barlow. I would say when the Bloomberg American Health Initiative was announced, everybody in the school was like, what is this new thing? How does it work? And Allison was in our office going, we want fellows, we want faculty, we want grants. It's so important to work together because the challenges that we focus on, the Bloomberg American Health Initiative, are challenges that have been faced by the Indigenous community, where Indigenous knowledge and ideas have been incredibly important, food being one of them. And so we have been able to support faculty, including Dr. Walls, who I believe is in an absolute class by herself in terms of her vision and work in this area. And we're so proud that she is one of the Bloomberg Professors of American Health. It also includes Dr. Warren, who's the co-director of the center. And it includes a whole bunch of fellows that we have been able to work together to bring in and provide additional support for. I think you're hearing from several of them today, including Jeffrey Wells, Lucas McKinnon, Jordan Smith, Livy Lewis, and Kelly Pingree, all presenting different projects. And through the Bloomberg American Health Initiative, we provide support for them to do projects with their organizations, many of whom are in tribal areas. And we also have provided support for a whole bunch of different kinds of projects, some of which are really helping the rest of the country appreciate the innovation and ideas that have come out of addressing these challenges in Indigenous areas. So we are really proud for this connection, and particularly for today, which is going to be about food. Food is really important, and in many different cultures, it's very important. And it is both about health, but it's also about how we know each other, how we remember things, and how we feel like ourselves. I'll just tell you, I remember one moment from medical school. It was not a particularly fun moment, but I was following a nutritionist. They said, okay, today is your day as a medical student to follow around a nutritionist. And we visited somebody who had just had a heart attack in the hospital. And there was a nutritionist, a young nutritionist, who asked him the following question: what is your favorite food? And he gave this long answer about a dish that his grandparents had made him from his home country and had a little of this and had a little of that and it was spiced up this way. And she said, "You can never eat that again." And he had a look on his face like, "Wow, that's not good. You know, I guess this is what I get so much pleasure from, you know?" And they said, "What's your second favorite food?" Now he was a little bit more cautious, you know, but he went into his second favorite food and she was like, "You can never eat that again." And she said, "You can have steamed broccoli and rice," you know? And it was like a white rice that was kind of this grayish model. And I thought to myself, there's got to be a better way that we can integrate food and health. And this is just not it. And as we think about today and the work that I know is happening in the center all across the country, we're really creating a path to do that. So thank you all for being here and really look forward to the rest of the day.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Walls and Dr. Sharfstein. Your leadership and partnership is very important. Yeah. Now, folks, it's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Tara Maudrie, a proud citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians and an assistant professor at the University of Michigan. Dr. Maudrie's work uplifts Indigenous food sovereignty and community-driven approaches to health. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tara Maudrie for our keynote address.
Bonjour, everyone. As Ashley mentioned, my name is Tara Maudrie, and I'm an enrolled member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Michigan in the School of Social Work. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more fully in a minute, but I'm really honored to be here with you all today. I'm really, really grateful for people for making this space to talk about food, especially in today's current political climate. And also, personally, I just realized this morning it's been exactly a year since I defended my dissertation here, so I can't think of a better way to celebrate that. Thank you. The title of this talk, What Feeds Us, Indigenous Foodways, Kinship, and the Power of Collective Continuance, comes from the deep belief that Indigenous food systems hold incredible brilliance. Our foodways are not just about growing or harvesting food. They're about maintaining relationships and ways of living that teach us how to be good relatives to one another and to the world around us. Over the next little while, I'm going to share a little bit about my work. I'm going to share some stories, ideas, and examples from communities I've been privileged to work alongside, and some examples from Indigenous communities across Turtle Island to think together about how Indigenous foodways can teach us how to work well together. Okay, I'm going to take a moment to introduce myself in my traditional language and offer a little bit of my relationality in this work. Buju Mishkwa Anangukwe Nijishnakas, Mikanuk Ndudam, Bawating Nindojaba. Greetings, my relatives. My English name is Tara Maudrie, and I'm an enrolled citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie Nation of Chippewa Indians. I'm Snapping Turtle Clan, and as part of my Indigenous research practice and in the spirit of qualitative research, transparency and reflexivity, I want to offer a little bit of my relationality and how I come to this work. I want to be clear that I offer these statements not just as a way to talk about myself, although I do love to do that, but as a way to explain how my connectedness is really fundamental to understanding my research and the work I do with communities. As I mentioned a few times, I'm Sault Ste. Marie Ojibwe, and I'm Snapping Turtle Clan, but I've spent most of my life as what many refer to as an urban Native person, meaning like 70% of Native peoples, I've lived in urban and suburban areas for most of my life. My interest in food systems and nutrition work is informed by my family's rich history of commercial treaty fishing, as well as my family's history of type 2 diabetes that really pushed me into this nutrition work. And although my work is informed by my Western education, including here from Johns Hopkins, I have an MS-PH in human nutrition and a PhD in social behavioral interventions. That work and that training is really important to my work, but I also want to be clear that the cultural teachings and values instilled in me by my community are equally important to this work. And I promise I'll be done with disclaimers in a minute, but in Indigenous communities, when we share knowledge or we share a teaching, we often share who taught us and where they taught us and even who they learned that from. And in some ways, it's similar to citing your work, but instead of being focused on proving you know something because it exists in a Western knowledge system and you can find it on Google Scholar, It's a little bit more about my accountability to my teachers and relations to pass on stories and knowledge in a good way. I engage in my work seriously and carefully, not only because I want to reflect well on myself, but because I know this reflects on all my teachers and mentors and all of my relations. Okay, to give you a little bit of a roadmap so that maybe you have some hope at the end of the tunnel when you know we're getting close to being done, I'll share a little bit about where we're headed today. First, we'll center Indigenous foodways as complex, sustainable systems that hold deep knowledge and lessons for us all. Next, we'll briefly acknowledge the histories of disruption that make revitalization work so necessary for Indigenous communities. We'll also explore how relational foodways connect nourishment to collective well-being and across generations, species, time, and place. And finally, I want to close with an invitation to see Indigenous foodways not just as a movement important to Indigenous peoples, but as teachings for how we can all learn to live well together here. So when I've said the word Indigenous foodways or the phrase a few times, and I want to be clear when I'm saying that, I'm not just talking about a food system. I'm talking about systems of relationships that have sustained our peoples and the lands, waters, and our more than human relatives, meaning plants and animals, since time immemorial. Each Indigenous community holds deep place-based knowledges that are shaped by and are responsive to ecosystems they belong to. So as climates change, our knowledges change to be able to help us adapt to that change. Our place-based knowledges protect our biodiversity of our planet, and they carry deep intergenerational connectedness. It's a really important way that we're able to connect across generations, and we'll continue to talk about that throughout this. And of course, our foodways are deeply tied to our identities and our very health. I want to be clear too, Indigenous foodways are not static traditions. We're not trying to return to something that no longer exists. They are living systems of innovation, care, and reciprocity that exist today. I also want to name, to begin, and this might be a hot take, but I think it's true, Indigenous food systems are the only truly sustainable food systems North America has known, and I believe probably ever will know. These foodways have always been about maintaining balance, ensuring that the relationships that we have continue to feed us far into the future and for many generations to come. Earlier, when we heard from Shane about our land acknowledgement, it mentioned treaties. And a lot of times when we think about treaties, we often think about the ones that are written on paper, the ones between our Native nations and settler colonial governments. But for many people, including my own people, the Anishinaabe people, our first treaties were not with other humans at all. They were with our more than human kin, our plants and animal relatives, the waters, and the land. And this original treaty was, and still is, an agreement of responsibility, that they were giving themselves to nourish us, and in return, we were to care for, protect, and speak on behalf of those more than human kin in order to feed and sustain our worlds. Building on this idea, from an Indigenous perspective, humans are not the center of a food system. We're simply one part of a vast interconnected network of relationships that depends on balance and respect. Food in this way is an important way that we can share intergenerational knowledge, and we can build connection across culture and across generations. Our foodways really help us to pass on teaching, stories, ceremonies, and spiritual well-being across generations. And for many nations, our creation stories and prophecies are directly tied to our ancestral foods, reminding us that these relationships are sacred, ancient, and ongoing. As an Anishinaabe person, you might hear other Anishinaabe introduce themselves as people of the wild rice. And again, that really comes from our original prophecies that we were to go to the place where the food grew on the water. And so it's deeply, deeply tied to our identities and how we came to be in this place. So before diving into the next part, I want to share a quote from my auntie Shiloh Maples, who's an incredible Odawa seed keeper and now doing her PhD at University of Michigan. In her podcast, Spirit Plate, she said, "The stories of our foodways are one of the greatest testaments of Indigenous brilliance and beauty of spirit. Before we can talk about Indigenous people's food traditions and contemporary efforts to revitalize their systems, we have to understand the history of disruption that makes this work necessary." So briefly, we're going to touch on these disruptions to our food systems. I'm not going to focus on this because that is not the story of who we are. And I want to be very clear that these settler-imposed food system disruptions are just a small blip in the rich history and future of our Indigenous foodways. But these disruptions are important for understanding the context of where we are today and the work we're doing in our communities. So in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We all know that story. But what nobody talks about is what they really brought with them, right? Of course, they traveled across the ocean. They brought food with them because they maybe didn't want to starve on the sea, which I think would personally be a pretty terrible way to die. But they also brought with them a lot of things. So one of the most important and truly awful things they brought with them was really their belief in inferiority of Indigenous peoples and their foods. From very early on, settlers wrote terrible things about Indigenous peoples and our bodies and our foodways, and really that they believed that our foods were not enough to sustain their superior European brain. And to give you a bit of a laugh, I think one of the funniest things I've written from early settler journals or writings was that they were very concerned that Indigenous peoples did not have gastrointestinal distress. And I think that's so funny to like look at people and be like, man, they don't have stomach aches. Like there's something really wrong with them. Like, man, you just have to laugh at it because it's like, wow, huh. Anyways, but as they proliferated across North America, they caused damage to land and waterways and our Indigenous foodways. Some of this was intentional, some of it was maybe a little unintended. So as they brought with them non-Indigenous foods, and those foods continued to move across North America, so things like chicken, cows, wheat, all those things that are non-Indigenous to here, they competed with our Indigenous plants and animals for space and resources and damaged a lot of those foods. They also caused intentional changes to our land and waterways. So some very specific examples, things like the Hoover Dam, the Klamath River Dam, logging in northern Minnesota, the Sioux Locks where I live, all of those things disrupted our Indigenous foodways and our ability to practice our traditional food practices. There were also, again, this would be an entire, probably course, if not a lecture. We could talk about the policies of disruption and disconnection that have disrupted our foodways over time. So specifically, we saw that a lot of Native peoples were moved from their homelands to undesirable tracts of land, often many hundreds of miles away from where they originally lived. We saw the introduction of reservation lifestyles where Native peoples were confined to small, undesirable tracts of land. My own family was part of the boarding school generation, so Native children were taken from their families and raised in mostly Catholic boarding schools, and that caused disruptions. And of course, we see urban Indian relocation policies later on. And all of those things cause disruption and disconnection to our food systems. If you aren't growing up in your homelands where your ancestors knew how to grow food and you're hundreds of miles away, how are you going to grow those foods? Or if you grew up in a boarding school and you don't grow up on the land, how are you going to teach your children how to hunt if you didn't have that same experience? So all of these sorts of things cause disruption and disconnection within our food systems. And lastly, the hardest one is sort of this very intentional weaponization of food against Indigenous peoples. And this is something we've seen time and time again. To give you another laugh, one time I was telling the story of how George Washington purposely burned Iroquois crops to starve them in the winter to force them into compliance with treaties, and I accidentally said George Bush. And so if I ever go missing, like the Dixie Chicks, you know what happened. But you see very deliberate acts of weaponization of food against Indigenous peoples. So on the right, we see a picture of buffalo skulls. And there was a very specific directive from the government to kill buffalo because it would cause starvation, and sort of they had the idea of every buffalo gone is an Indian dead. So, okay, so I kind of ruined the punchline of the slide. But all of those terrible things that happen to our food systems decreased access to our traditional ancestral foods. And when I say traditional ancestral foods, I mean foods that have existed in this communities or in this continent since pre-contact, so the foods that have nourished our ancestors since time immemorial. And so all of those things decreased access to those healthy traditional foods and our ability to practice the foodways that help us get those foods. As I mentioned, if your family grew up in a boarding school, it disrupted some of those intergenerational food knowledges and the ability to pass on those knowledges. All of that increased reliance on government food rations and what we now know as supplemental nutrition programs. And it's important to note that early on, these programs were really designed to treat and prevent malnutrition. And so they historically included very calorie-dense foods and typically more nutrient-poor foods that were the opposite of our traditional diet. And so in a very short period of time, we went from a traditional seasonal-based diet that was very healthy, very nutrient-dense, to all of a sudden this very calorically dense foods that had a lot of cheese, dairy, wheat, all these things that we weren't used to eating in a very short period of time. And all of these things reduced our diet quality. So when we went from eating a very seasonal, healthy diet to eating some of these more government food rations that were really to prevent us from starvation, our diet quality was reduced, and also our physical activity. If anybody's been hunting or racing, I know Melissa's been racing, it's a very physically intensive practice. And so when we're not able to practice that, our physical activity opportunities decrease too. And that basically created the perfect storm for a rise in dietary-related chronic diseases. So things like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, all of those sorts of things. The last point is really kind of what we're going to return to throughout this talk, is really the imposition of dominant society food ideals and standards. This idea that the imposition of a certain way of eating being right or wrong has affected our relationship to food and discredited our Indigenous ways of knowing and being, which is a specific type of knowledge injustice we'll kind of return to throughout this presentation. So while colonization disrupted our foodways, it didn't destroy them. I often hear people talk about, our foodways were destroyed. I strongly disagree with that. I think our foodways were temporarily disrupted and they'll continue to thrive and return. Across generations, our Indigenous communities have carried forward seeds, stories, teachings, and practices that remind us how to live in good relation with one another. And that is where collective continuance comes in. It's really a concept that speaks to the capacity of Indigenous peoples and all of our relations to sustain our communities, our cultures, and our ecologies together. When we think about Indigenous foodways through this lens, we're not just talking about survival or access to food. We're talking about the continuation of relationships that make life possible. These foodways are expressions of love, responsibility, and relational balance, and they show us what it truly means to nourish collective well-being across generations. The next part of this conversation shifts from what was interrupted to what has endured. Indigenous conceptualizations of nourishment, food sovereignty, and kinship that have always guided how we feed and care for one another. So the concept of collective continuance really comes from Kyle White's work, who's a colleague of mine at University of Michigan and a Potawatomi scholar and philosopher. In a different life, I would have loved to have been a philosopher because, man, his papers are so cool to read if you ever have time. But he really talks about this idea of collective continuance as a way to think about Indigenous foodways, not as cultural preservation or nostalgia for an era gone by, but as an active, ongoing work of living well together. Collective continuance is about maintaining the relationships that sustain our life here. So our relationships with land, with water, with our more than human kin, and with one another. To put it shortly, it's a difference between surviving and thriving. So we didn't just survive what happened to our food systems, we're thriving beyond this through our collective continuance. Indigenous foodways are one of the most powerful ways we practice collective continuance. When we plant, harvest, fish, or gather together, we're doing much more than just going out and getting food. We're carrying out our relational responsibilities, our original treaties, we're sharing knowledge intergenerationally, and we're enacting our values of reciprocity and care. This framework of collective continuance reminds us that the health of our communities and our ecosystems are inseparable. Nourishment isn't just a personal outcome. It's a collective responsibility that mirrors the adaptability and strength of our foodways here. When we think about collective continuance, it's about how our relationships with the land and our more than human relatives and with one another sustain life across generations, place, and time. And our foodways are one of the clearest expressions of that. They're how we practice those relationships, how we live out our responsibilities. But when we look about how nutrition is typically defined in Western science, that relational depth is somehow a little missing. And so next, I want to explore what happens when we shift from thinking about nutrition, which is typically defined on thinking about nutrients and disease prevention, to thinking about nourishment, which centers relationships, reciprocity, and collective well-being. So I want to be clear, as somebody who's trained in nutrition and one of my professors is here with me today, I don't think we should throw nutrition out. I think it's an okay science. I obviously use it a lot in my work, but I do think it means something different when we think about in our Indigenous communities what we mean when we say we want to be well or we want to be fed. So typically when we think about nutrition through a Western lens, or as Josh shared his example, it's often, oh, you can't eat this, there's a right and wrong way to eat, very sort of a black and white science. And it's often reduced to sort of what's on the plate, or the science of it is. So thinking about the calories, the nutrients, and really how does this food relate to disease prevention? And in my opinion, I think a lot of the ways we think about nutrition in the Western world are very fear-based. And I think that's something the whole world could learn from, is finding nutrition as more of a love-based science rather than a fear-based science of, if you don't eat this way, you're going to get this. I think we could do a little better to think about how we can eat to have holistic well-being. And I will say that's gotten better in recent years, but still something to be worked on. In the Western sort of biomedical world too, health is often framed as an individual outcome, and food is really thought about as a resource or a tool, something to be measured, managed, or even prescribed. But Indigenous nourishment takes a bit of a different lens, or a different plate maybe, if you will. Instead, it focuses on relationships with food, with land, with community. It's rooted in reciprocity and in respect. And in this framework, food isn't just something we consume. Food is a relative, and it's our teacher. In our worldviews, health isn't just the absence of disease, It's the presence of balance, both ecological, spiritual, and communal. In our communities, nourishment is guided by kinship, ceremony, and stories. It's about how we live well in relation to all beings, and not just how we sustain our bodies or prevent certain diseases. This framing opens new possibilities. What if we measured health not by what's on our plates, but by how the food got there, who it connected, and what it has sustained? Next, I'm briefly going to walk us through some of my work that shows how our Indigenous foodways and knowledge systems have provided new ways of thinking about and addressing nourishment. So I mentioned I defended my dissertation a year ago, and I might have recycled the slide, I won't lie to you. But through my dissertation, I was really honored to work with American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian food sovereignty experts, knowledge holders, nutrition activists across the Turtle Island or across the country. And through this project, we gathered a range of perspectives. And I should mention too, this project really started as we were going to redefine food security. And I really quickly got humbled because people were like, actually, we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about what it means to us to be fed. And so it turned into a much more powerful project. So again, a little bit of a lesson in redirection. But through this project, I was really honored to work with all of these food sovereignty knowledge holders from across the country to really understand what exactly does it mean to us to be nourished, to be well. And so eventually what we came up with is the model on the right, which we call the Indigenous Nourishment Model, and it depicts 4 main domains of nourishment. So you can see at the top, there's a physical domain. To the right, there's spiritual. On the bottom, there's emotional. And on the left, there's relational. And these are all circles, and they intersect because we truly believe you can't do one part of this without touching all the other parts. They're pretty inseparable from one another. And I also, in grad school, I remember getting a lot of critiques on my conceptual frameworks because we're like, everything isn't connected. And I'm like, I think it is. And it turned out fine for me, so I keep pushing back. But the quotes on the left, again, are really describing here that nutrition is also nourishment. It can be both. So it can be nourishing our spirits, our communities, our people, our hearts, and our bodies, as well as physically. So again, this concept of nourishment can mean something a little different to our communities. And we also talk about food being medicine, but it's not just medicine. It's also, again, our spirituality, and it's how we're connected to one another. Next, I'm briefly going to walk us through the 4 main domains of nourishment. There's a lot more than this, but we're going to walk through the 4 main domains and how Indigenous communities are working to support each of these domains of well-being. So our first domain, physical nourishment, really focuses a lot on, when you think about nutrition, most of us think about what you eat and what happens physiologically to your body once you consume those foods. So I think that's where most of us, our definitions of nutrition would fall. But it also includes our connection to land, our connection to plants and animals, and our land-based food activities. So things like going out on the land. I'm a really avid hunter, so going out on the land and practicing that, but also practicing food knowledge in the kitchen. We're going to hear a great demonstration later. I'm really excited about. Woo, woo. So over there, I've been looking at those radishes over there. We were talking about them, and he's really lucky I haven't taken any yet. But so again, practicing food knowledge in the kitchen by feeding one another is also part of our physical nourishment. So again, even though that's typically what people think of when they think of nutrition as sort of this physical domain, it's also a little bit more expansive than that. And so just to briefly share a quote, by taking care of the seeds, tending to the garden, really having that close, my hands really connected to my food at all the different stages, really has helped me have what I think is a healthier relationship with food. And I don't just mean nutritionally, but on a lot of different levels. So again, sort of that physical connection to food gets at a deeper level of what it means to be nourished. So our communities are doing so many amazing things. There's a lot of really cool things our communities are doing, and I am not able to highlight all of these in this presentation, but I did want to highlight some really important things our communities are doing to support physical nutrition, especially in today's current uncertain political climate. So as I mentioned earlier, our traditional ancestral foods are really rich in a lot of really important things. So they're high in fiber, typically higher in protein, they have great vitamins and minerals. But also our communities are working to provide those traditional ancestral foods, but they're also working to provide access to things like physical nourishment, like again, connecting to food through gardening, hunting, fishing, and preparing foods together. There's a lot of really great things our communities are doing. To highlight one, the Tribal Elders Food Boxes is run by a great friend of mine, Dan Cornelius, who's a lawyer and a farmer out in Wisconsin. It's a food box that started during the pandemic, and it's mostly composed of foods from indigenous food producers. And through this program, they're actually able to get a lot of them USDA certified to provide foods in these boxes, which is, again, really powerful. So they're not just providing food, they're also providing a more sustainable food source for the future by empowering local communities. We also see things like the Tribal Elder Meal Program. So my own tribe, which I'll talk a little bit about later, 4 days a week in each of our units, elders can come and get a hot, fresh meal for lunch, and they can share that meal in person with other people like we're all gonna do later today. But they can also take that home if they have, mobility restrictions or just need to be at home. Melissa mentioned earlier the food distribution program on Indian reservations, again, is a really important way that we're able to provide foods to our communities and, again, are able to prioritize traditional food producers as much as possible. The last one here, venison donation drives, we're going to return to later, so just a sneak peek. We're going to come back to that. Okay. So moving on to our second domain, spiritual nourishment. So at the beginning, I talked a little bit about our original treaties, our original instructions, our creation stories, and how those tie us to our foods. And again, this is not just that these foods are important to us because they were part of our creation story, it's that we're responsible to them. We're speaking on behalf of them, and it's our job to protect them through policy and through our work too. So again, really getting at this idea that our foods can be physically nourishing, but they can also be spiritually nourishing if you're producing those foods in a good way and connecting to them. So Anthony Barela, a food sovereignty activist, I should have also mentioned too, participants were able to be named for their quotes. I know that's a little jarring, I probably didn't say that, but participants did opt into being named for their quotes for this project. It was part of our Indigenous research practices. And he shared, if some of our original instructions are to care for one another and to allow one another to survive, then that must mean that we also allow one another to eat, to have food. So I feel like it's embedded. To our instructions for how do we care for one another is to provide food for one another. So again, food really being at the core of what we mean when we're saying we're taking care of one another and being good relatives. I won't read this full quote to you, but this quote comes from Tony Stagner McLaughlin, who is the CEO of Native American Agriculture Fund. And she shared that in every Native community she's visited, their creation story is somehow tied to food. It's usually always reciprocal, and that something is sacrificing itself for the well-being of the people. And in return, the people are giving of themselves to care for the ecosystems, the plants, the animals, the air, the water, and that one day they will return to those systems to feed them once again. So we think about how do we nourish that sense of spiritual nourishment? There's a lot of really important things that our communities are doing. And one of the most important things is learning about and passing on traditional teachings and stories. So visiting together over meals like we're gonna have later today is a great way to pass on spiritual nourishment and talk about foods that nourish you and why they're important to you. We also talk about ceremony and prayer and accepting gratefulness for our food. And I think some people might be laughing. We don't have favorite elders, but if we did, Hope might be one of them. She's a really beloved elder from the Minneapolis community, and she is such a great example of spiritually nourishing everyone around her and really connecting everyone to gratitude and reciprocity with our food systems by sharing her stories and teachings. One of my favorite examples is a really great camp that's run by Laverne Dementloff, who's a social worker and a PhD up at, I think she's at University of Alaska Fairbanks. I might have gotten her affiliation wrong, so don't quote me on that. But she runs this really amazing program called the Elders Mentoring Elders program. And it connects elders who maybe have lost touch with some of their traditional foodways for lots of different reasons. Like we mentioned, maybe they were part of a boarding school generation, maybe they grew up in an urban area, or maybe they didn't have older relatives to teach them about their foodways. And it brings them together with elders who do have that knowledge. And it teaches them about these foodways that maybe they weren't passed on as young people. And then it empowers them to go back to their home communities and pass it on to the next generation. So again, a really powerful way of restoring these foodways, and again, connecting people to things that maybe they didn't know without shame or judgment, and really just bringing them back into that intergenerational knowledge circle. I think a lot about, I'm a really avid hunter, as you might have noticed by my pictures, but I actually didn't learn to hunt as a kid, and my dad was a hunter, but he taught my brothers, but not me. So it's sort of a weird gendered component. But I learned mostly from my husband's family, and it really takes a lot to learn some of these foodways. You can't read a book or a bunch of academic articles and go out in the woods and hunt a deer. Like, it doesn't work. I've seen people try, it doesn't work. You really need people in a family to spend time with you out there on the land, really learning about what is a deer sign? Where's a good place to hunt? How do you do this? How do you treat them as a good relative? And so again, programs like these are really bringing people back into that intergenerational knowledge circle so this knowledge can continue to exist for future generations. So this one always gives me chills talking about this because I think it is such a great program, and I really hope to see programs like that expand across Turtle Island. Moving on to our third domain of nourishment, most of us, when we think about emotion and nutrition, it's almost always in a negative context. Like we think about when I was in grad school, they're like when you're stressed, when you're depressed, when you're anxious, you're going to choose high calorie foods. There's a lot of research on that, that if you're experiencing different types of mental health distress, people tend to choose more calorie dense foods and nutrient dense foods. But what came out of this project was really sort of the opposite. People really focused on the positive parts of nutrition, the emotional nutrition that's really positive and good for us, and how healthy eating can really connect us to positive emotions. So I mentioned gratitude before, really the sense of gratitude around your food and the foods you have on your table and the people you're able to share with can really bring a strong sense of emotional connection to your foods. It can also bring a lot of joy. I think most of us have some sort of food that our grandparents taught us to prepare, or somebody from an older generation. And when you eat that food, it makes you think of them. So again, just a positive sort of domain of nourishment that I think is a little underlooked, is how we can think about our foods as bringing us positive emotions and part of our mental health work too. So again, here's a quote from an anonymous participant that shared that there's a joy that comes with being able to participate in cultural food systems. Even if you're not currently on your homelands or with other people from your tribe, you can still eat those foods and there's still that connection. And so I'm going to look at Carrie over there because I was part of the Baltimore community for a long time. And I mentioned missing venison, and one of the community members brought me venison, and what a joy that brought me to be able to share that food with her. So again, our foods are an important way we can experience a lot of really positive emotions. So again, thinking about food as a way to express love and joy for one another, and being empowered about our foods, being a part of your food system really brings a strong sense of empowerment. When you grow your own foods, even if it's like a crappy little tomato, it's so cool to be like, I grew this, or to be able to gift it to somebody. This year, I started my new job at U of M, and I was walking around the hallways with like boxes of zucchinis, and anybody that looked at me, I was like, please, dear God, take one. We have too many. But again, it's sort of an empowerment of like, wow, I'm able to feed not just my family, but other people. And that's a really cool feeling. And again, there's a lot of ways we can support emotional nutrition, providing access to emotionally meaningful foods. So I think back to that the relative that Josh was talking about, that wasn't able to eat some of his favorite foods, or was told he shouldn't be able to eat some of his favorite foods. And how can we find ways to make sure people still have access to foods that are emotionally meaningful to them while still providing healthy nutrition? I didn't put this in here, but one of the really cool examples I've seen is Native American Community Clinic, which is in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and was a community partner of mine and Melissa's for quite some time. They're doing some really cool work with emotional nutrition, and part of what they're doing with one of their recovery groups is they're doing sort of talking circles weekly, and they're providing the same healthy foods every week. And sort of their hypothesis, or what they're thinking about, is if we can help people rewire their comfort foods to be healthy foods, what a difference that might make for people that's in recovery. And I think that's really cool. They're not doing like any formal research on that. I don't got enough time for that, but somebody should do something with that, because I think that's a really powerful idea about how we can sort of think about reframing some of our comfort foods. And lastly, I didn't mention earlier, but I have two stepdaughters, and something we think a lot about is how do we talk about food in our bodies in front of them? It's really important for our young people to maintain emotionally healthy relationships with food. And so again, calling out and addressing diet culture when it appears in our communities, and again, finding really positive ways to think about nutrition. Okay, all right, our last domain here is thinking about relational nutrition. And have you guys heard the word relational in the room? Yeah? Some of you? Okay. Well, to be clear, so relational, I mean all of the relationships you have. Sometimes people don't quite know what that means. Sometimes in the Western world, I see people use the word social. It's sort of similar, but again, instead of just our connection with other humans, I mean our connection with our more than human relatives. So our plants, our animals, the land, the water around us. And so again, this relational domain of nourishment is really thinking about how can we nourish each other through connection? How can we maintain this connectedness as a way of being nourished? And so again, really recognizing that none of us can function without the others. It'd be really bold of us to assume we can exist without plants or animals. None of us are self-sufficient in our foodways. And so again, really recognizing it does come down to our kinship systems and our ability and our willingness to be reliant and to be dependent on one another. I also like to bring this up because a lot of times when people talk about food sovereignty, there was sort of this idea for a few years at least that food sovereignty meant self-sufficiency. that communities could feed themselves and they didn't need anybody else and they were on their own and they were doing it. And that's a cool idea in some ways, but that's really not how our communities have ever functioned. Our communities have always relied on the generosity of the natural world, and we've traded with one another for millennia. And so we need to learn how to recognize that we can do what we can do and trust that other people are doing what they can do and sharing amongst one another with that. And so I mentioned again, I'm a really avid hunter. That is almost a full-time job on top of your job. And so I can't hunt and fish and grow food and process food and cook all the foods. So I do what I can do and I share with other people and they share their generosity back with me. So again, this domain is really about the idea that we need each other. Food is not an individual outcome. Nutrition is not individual. We need each other. And we really need to get back to some of those ways that some of these foodways maybe are meant to be conducted in community. Yeah, so again, really thinking about food as a way to connect with other people. How many people here like eat lunch over their laptop? Like most of us, yeah. But like how cool would it be if we all just like, all right, we're done with that, 15 minutes, we're all gonna go sit together and eat. How much more nourished would we feel going back into our workday, having taken 15, 20 minutes just to share a little bit with each other, a little bit of our kinship in that way. And of course, thinking about our more than human relatives, I think that's an equation or part of the equation that's often overlooked, is again, really thinking about how can we think about and protect their interests? What do they need from us? What can we do to protect them? So again, thinking about choosing more ecological choices when we can and things like that. Our communities are doing so many cool things around relational nutrition that there are too many to even put here. But one of the things I really appreciate, I mentioned earlier, like the Elder Meals program, that elders are able to go in person and have lunch with people, even if they're living alone, and able to get some of that relational social connection with one another, I think is a really important thing. One of the other things I've kind of been toying with in my work, and to give a spoiler, I think one of the places I'm trying to go is, okay, so we have a lot of these food as medicine boxes. We have a lot of these produce RX boxes. And it's really cool that we're giving people food, but we're also expecting people to go home to their households to have time to cook those foods on their own. But instead, what if we were able to create some sort of community prep kitchen where people could come in, they could prepare their healthy meals together with other people in their community, or even it could be treated as a co-op. Maybe people volunteer a few days a month and they're able to have that. So you're putting something on their plate while you're taking something off. So you're providing connection while kind of recognizing that we do need to work together. We can't do it all. I think most of us that work full-time jobs, if you have a family, like to work a full-time job, to have any semblance of a hobby, mental health, exercise, like there's not enough hours in a day. And so how can we think about supporting our communities through some of these more relational approaches that really connect us while also making it easier? Because food was always a communal practice. We didn't just all cook individually by ourselves. We were always cooking together. And so how can we bring back some of those traditions through our foodways? So when we think about collective continuance, the true power of Indigenous foodways is that we offer both scientific, spiritual, relational, and emotional frameworks for really restoring and protecting planetary health here on Turtle Island. And our tribes and our intertribal and our urban native communities are part of a much larger resurgence of our foodways across Turtle Island. Okay, so I'm going to share a few more examples. I'm really proud of my own tribe, and that's where I live. So a lot of these examples are going to come from there, but I do have examples from other tribes and what they're doing as well, and urban native communities too. So Sault Ste. Marie tribe, we're the largest federally recognized tribe east of the Mississippi River. We have over 50,000 members, and we were 12, I think it's 12, or maybe it's 6, I think it should say 6, historical bands of Ojibwe that banded together in the 1970s to gain federal recognition. So I'm sharing that because there are a lot of different practices across those different bands, and we basically came together to become a tribe so the government would recognize us, but there's a lot of diversity even within our own tribe. Our tribe is mostly headquartered in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, but we have 5 service units that span the upper peninsula of Michigan. So if you do the hand thing, mostly up here in the upper part, kind of near Canada and the Great White North. And each of those units has their own reservation, their own government representation, their own healthcare services and community centers. So again, a really large tribe with a lot of really interesting things going on. Many of our tribal members practice hunting, fishing, and gathering rights that really were sort of derived, at least legally, from the 1836 Treaty of Washington, and we receive a lot of our licenses from our tribe's Department of Natural Resources. So every year, our tribe issues about 4,000 permits for inland hunting and harvesting. That's a lot, but when you think about 50,000 members, it's really not that much compared to the amount of members we have. But on average, there's around 53 species of fish and wildlife that are harvested every year, and over 100,000 animals that are harvested every year by our tribal members. Our tribe is doing some really interesting things. So we steward and co-steward the Hiawatha National Forest with the state of Michigan. So that means any decision making around that national forest, our tribe is consulted and we have an equal decision making power in how resources are managed within those areas. And through those efforts, they're doing a lot of really, really cool things. In particular, they're revitalizing cultural fire practices to improve the resilience of our boreal forests. As we're seeing climate change, we're seeing forest fires become more of a concern for our Midwest communities that typically were not. And so we're looking at how we can revitalize some of those cultural fire practices to protect our forests in the future. A lot of our areas in the Upper Peninsula do not grow wild rice very well because of the sulaks and the freighters that go through there and stir up the dirt in the bottom of the river, so it makes it really difficult for our wild rice to seed, and it's made it really easy for invasive cattail to seed. And so our tribe is working to remove invasive cattails. That's actually the picture here. We were out removing, or we were planting wild rice in an area that they've removed a lot of those invasive cattails. They're also conducting their own research to really understand the health of their more than human relatives that live in our region. And I don't remember their exact Ojibwe name off the top of my head, but the Health Division has a really vested interest in understanding how we're all related. And that's really the main purpose of their work, is to understand how we're all related and how we can live well here together. So I mentioned they're doing some really cool research. So they do their own assessment to monitor the health of the Great Lakes and the inland lakes and rivers, and that's really important. I mentioned I come from a commercial fishing family, so we care a lot about our fish health. And our tribe captures and they'll assess the health of different fish. And when they catch fish and they process them to, assess the health, all of those are donated back to that Elder Meals program I mentioned earlier. So again, a really cool cycle of how they're doing this research and also feeding people at the same time. The Sioux tribe is also really interesting because even though we have commercial fishermen, we are putting our fish back in the Great Lakes. So we put approximately, I think we put 1 million whitefish and 1 million walleye that are released into the Great Lakes every year. So again, even though we're commercial fishing, we're trying to find ways to give back, even though the state of Michigan is stocking non-Indigenous species and won't stock Indigenous species. I don't know, that's a different topic. We can talk about that later, but our tribe's trying to find ways to give back. As we're trying to be reciprocal and trying to restore some of these populations as well. We also support our commercial fishermen. Again, I mentioned I come from one of those families that use that as a primary way of living. My family no longer does, but we're really working to support the people that do get their primary way of living. If you've ever ate whitefish in Michigan, I also have a list of the best whitefish sandwiches in Michigan. So if you're interested in that, definitely let me know because I've got them. But if you've ever ate whitefish in Michigan, more than likely it was caught by a Sioux tribe fisherman. We have more commercial fishermen than anyone else in the country. Or not in the country, in Michigan, I should say. And also one of the other really cool things, just a nerdy thing, the fish that we raise are raised in inland ponds, and they use a specific type of dye in the water that dyes a bone on their inner ear. And so when the fish are processed, they can tell whether or not that was a Sioux tribe raised fish. And at one point they did an assessment, I think it was like 3 in 10, I don't know the exact number, but it was pretty cool. It was more than you'd think were fish that were raised by our tribe. So again, doing a lot to give back to our foodways. Okay, I told you guys we were going to come back to this venison donation drive. So through our treaty protected hunting rights, the Sioux tribe is really working to provide venison to feed our elders. So as part of our treaty rights, we're able to hunt from the first day after Labor Day through the full weekend in January, and we're able to harvest up to 5 deer. As tribal members, there's some restrictions on how many can be antlered and things like that. But we're really using some of those treaty rights to find ways to feed our community in a sustainable way that doesn't involve relying on the government to feed us. And so this year they started this with a local processor. And so the Unit 1 Board of Directors voted to provide funds to process 10 deer that were donated, and those were given through our Tribal Elders Meal Program. So when elders come to get meals, again, they can take some frozen venison home with them to eat at a later time. And what I really love about this program is it's not just meeting nutritional needs or addressing food insecurity, it's about reaffirming our relationships between our hunters, our elders, our community members, and the animals who feed us. And it's really food sovereignty in action. And again, these treaty rights in action, they're not just legal rights. They're not just so we can go out there and slay all the deer. Again, we're using them to feed our communities in a really important way that we can care for one another and provide kinship. And this is I'm working with a funder in Michigan to see if we can do a larger study of venison donation and do some pre and post diet quality assessments, food security, and see if we can expand this across the Upper Peninsula, and then hopefully provide a model for other tribes that may want to do the same thing. Okay, before we get too far, anybody here a country music fan? A little bit? Maybe, okay, do you guys know who that is? The bottom right? It's Tyler Childers, yes. Yes, Carrie gets a prize. This program is called FAST Blackfeet, and it stands for Food Access and Sustainability Team within the Blackfeet Nation. I don't know any of them super well, but I am so impressed by them. I am such a fangirl of their work, and they're doing a lot of really important things with Blackfeet Nation to address food access issues. So they've started a food pantry, which is a weekly food boxes, and they have a client choice model. So it doesn't mean you just get what you get and you don't throw a fit. It means that clients are able to come in and choose what foods they want to be in their boxes, again, so that they're useful foods for them and not just random foods that people are going to be uninterested in eating. They can choose the foods that are meaningful to them. So for example, if maybe they don't eat red meat, they could choose foods that are not red meat, et cetera, et cetera. So there's not food waste there. They're also doing really cool nutrition education. So they're doing monthly hands-on cooking demonstrations with the people that are coming in to receive those food boxes. They have a training program to grow and harvest and process teas and vegetables. So they have like a pilot raised bed program that they've been doing with community members. And then they have a really similar initiative to the one I just talked about, Hunters Against Hunger. So again, local hunters can donate all or part of their harvest, which is then distributed through their food pantry. So again, really asking their community members to step up and feed one another while providing dignity and access to culturally relevant foods. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin and the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska. So they're doing a lot of really cool things. So they have a strong focus on agriculture, so growing food. So I've talked a lot about like hunting and things like that, but instead focusing on growing foods through USDA programs. And they're focusing on water conservation, which I think is an issue that's going to continue to become more and more important as time goes on, and also monitoring how herbicides and pesticides affect our more than human relatives. They're also doing a lot of workforce development. I saw a statistic the other day. I'm not good with numbers, so I'm not going to say it because I'm going to get it wrong. But we've lost a lot of farmers in the last couple hundred years. And so really trying to find ways to bring people into that work as a sustainable career option. They're also providing raised beds, soil, plants, seeds, and technical assistance to families on the reservations that want to grow food. So again, individual empowerment while sort of connecting to these larger community initiatives. The Yurok tribe is the largest tribe in California. They're approximately 5,000 members, and they're known for a lot of different things. If anybody remembers Sophie Nooner that was here, she was Yurok tribe, she was awesome. But they're known a lot for fishing, eeling, basket weaving, and canoe making. And the Yurok tribe and other tribes in the Klamath River Basin have really fought hard for removal of 2 different dams. And nearly 10 years after beginning the dam removal process, which sounds like I'm swearing, I promise I'm not, with the help of the Yurok tribal fisheries, the salmon populations have recovered enough that people can fish those. And so again, what an amazing win after like hundreds of years of fighting these dams, to be able to have those fish in the river again is such a gift and such an exciting thing for that community. And in 2022, so about 3 years ago, about a third of the salmon had spawned on their own again. So that's again a really positive thing that these fish are again coming to return to these waters and calling them home and won't need to be raised in fisheries forever, and hopefully will be able to continue to recover their population levels on their own. So I want to share a little bit about the East Phillips Native community, which is in Minneapolis. I mentioned I did part of my dissertation with the Minneapolis community and the Baltimore community. And I want to share a little bit about how urban Native communities are pushing back and reclaiming their foodways too. So the Phillips neighborhood in Minneapolis is home to a thriving urban Native community. If you've ever been there, they call it the Native Cultural Corridor. And so there's a lot of Native health businesses. There's powwow grounds, the coffee shop. There's All My Relations Art Gallery. There's all these great Native-focused health and community initiatives kind of right in this one area of the city. And it's also home to where the American Indian movement, if you've ever heard of that was sort of based and started in the East Phillips neighborhood in Minneapolis. But this neighborhood has historically been polluted, like most of our marginalized communities. Who would have thought they placed a pollution near us? I don't know, crazy. But there was a lot of historical pollution, things in the water that were really concerning citizens. And they found this sort of abandoned roof depot site, which has, if you can imagine the things that go into making your roof waterproof, not great for people, right? And so they found this and they sort of had figured out that maybe this is where some of the environmental contamination had come from. And they proposed a plan to the city that they wanted to rematriate this area, and they wanted to return it back into a community space. They wanted to remove some of those harmful chemicals from their community, and again, to turn it into an urban farm. It was a really long fight. It was a nasty fight too, I'll say. There was a lot of really bad politics going on. But through some community organizing, they were able to purchase that site, which again, I feel like the city should have given that to them, the land back, but whatever. But they were able to purchase that site, and they're working on creating an indoor urban farm, some housing, and a community center. So again, I'm really working to restore kinship with where they are in the city, and again, providing food through their work. Okay. So when I think about all these stories from East Phillips neighborhood in Minneapolis, to growing and providing space for community healing, or communities like Blackfeet and the Sioux tribe that are drawing on treaty rights to find ways to feed their community, I'm reminded that our Indigenous food systems are not relics of the past. They are living systems of care, governance, and resistance that show us how to live well in relationship with each other, with the land and the water, and with our more than human relatives. These foodways hold teachings for all of us, teachings about reciprocity, about responsibility, and about how collective well-being is built through everyday acts of nourishment. As we close, I want to invite us to reflect together on what these lessons might mean for our own food systems, our own communities, and our own responsibilities to lands and waters that feed us. Indigenous peoples have nourished the only sustainable food system North America has ever known since time immemorial. However, our foodways are not just for or about us. Instead, our foodways are an invitation to learn how to live and work well here together. This is an invitation, is not an act of charity or an act of inclusion, but instead is an ethical responsibility we all share as citizens of Turtle Island to work together to find ways to help our food systems nourish us. So as we close, I have a few reflection questions, and we'll start with any questions that exist, and I think we'll start with questions from Zoom. But I'm curious, as you guys think about foodways, like what are your food values? And how are those values reflected in our food policies, practices, and measures, and maybe what's going on a little bit in the federal government? And then also, what are your biggest foodway aspirations? Like if you could dream big, what do you think foodways would look like? What would they mean to you and your communities? And also, what food hopes and dreams do you carry for future generations? What seeds are you planting now, literally or metaphorically, that might one day feed your children, your students, your neighbors, or the land itself? Because our foodways really cannot be separated from our futures. What happens to the land or our more than human relatives will also happen to us. Each meal, each seed, each act of sharing and caring, they're small pieces of our collective continuance. They're how we remember our responsibilities to one another, and our Indigenous foodways have always taught us that nourishment is not a transaction, it's a relationship. And those relationships are what will help us learn how to live well together here, in this place, in this time. Miigwech, thank you all for listening, for learning, and for the work you all do to nourish your communities. So I'm going to leave it up here just so you can see my email for a second, and then I'm going to switch to the discussion slide. Okay, I'm going to go over. Okay, so I think we have a question from Zoom, right?
Yeah, I'm going to steal this really quick. And so like Tara said, we'll be giving the opportunity for folks in the room to ask any questions. We're going to start with a question off of Zoom here. So I'm going to switch this mic. Whoa. So we have a question in Zoom that first off talks about, thank you so much for this brilliant exposition, Tara. I'd like to ask how reciprocity, oh my God, I can't believe I said that word right, balance and care and being respectful with all the human life around us, connect with traditional practices, and at the same time, allow us to kill the beings around us. I understand and respect that this is traditional, but I have contradictions about this.
Could you repeat that last part?
So essentially, how do you balance kind of being respectful with all non-human life around us and still hunt and fish and things like that with showing that respect? How do you kind of balance those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's something that's a little tough for people to understand of like, if you love deer so much, why do you hunt them? It is a weird contradiction. And I think like a lot of things in life, the best things are a little contradictory, right? And so a lot of our teachings around the animals that have given themselves, we have specific teachings and stories. And one of them is that they chose to be in this relationship with us. They chose that they were going to nourish us. And then again, that we would protect them. We are always giving more than we're taking. That's something we take really seriously. So my partner and I, we hunt, and we are able to hunt over bait piles in the UP. And so we're feeding, I mean, today alone, I think there's been been 13 deer at our bait piles, and we will not take anywhere near that many. And so again, we're really trying to find ways to feed and take, or to take less than we're giving, and again, to find ways to protect them. So whether that be through policy, that we're finding ways to protect them more than we're taking. But again, it is a kind of an interesting thing. But the main thing is really that these animals have sort of spiritually chosen to be in relationship with us through our foodways. And so again, they've chosen that they're willing to give themselves for us if we give of ourselves to nourish them and to protect them too. So I know that can be kind of an interesting contradiction for people that aren't familiar with hunting. But again, it's sort of a spiritual reciprocity we have with those animals. Yeah, great question. Anybody in the room have any questions? Got
one. Thank you, Tara, for the wonderful presentation. One of the points you made later on was about the loss of farmers and re-engaging to kind of increase the number of people so that this work can continue. Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, there may be some obvious things that come to mind, but I'd love to hear from you about what you think some of the reasons might be for that and how there are efforts to replenish interest in that.
Yeah, great question. So for anybody that maybe, if you couldn't hear on Zoom, the question was sort of about the loss of farming and sort of disconnection from the food system, and how do we sort of reinvigorate interest in that area? And that's a really good question. There's a lot less farmers than there used to be, in part because there's a lot of corporations, and there's a lot less hunters than there used to be as well. I think in Michigan over the last 20 years, we've lost 200,000 deer hunters, which again is a crazy number to think about. And I think a lot of it really derives from this disconnection we've had with our foodways. So people are less connected to the foods that they're eating, the foods that are grown, than we've ever been. And so finding ways to reconnect people, in particular, I've seen some stuff, Michigan Farm Bureau is doing a lot of work to connect people with growing food as young people. So even children's storybooks, like a lot of stuff we've done here at Johns Hopkins with our children's storybooks to get people interested in growing food and connecting with food, but also getting people connected to hunting again, if that's something that's of interest to them. Again, it's one of those complicated things where I'm like, I don't know what the solution is, because in this current system where there's a lot of like large corporate farmers, it's difficult to get into that work. And there's in particular a large lack of native farmers. And part of that is the cost to get into farming, commercial fishing, those sorts of things. The startup cost is so incredibly high, that to get into those businesses, there's a lot of intergenerational things. And so it tends to stay in some families. And if the family stops doing that, maybe they sell to a large corporation. That doesn't necessarily mean that another family is going to step into that work. It's really difficult to do that. In particular, Dan Cornelius, who I mentioned earlier, who's a lawyer and a professor at University of Wisconsin-Madison, he's doing a lot of work to help native food producers and to get people into that. And so helping them with getting USDA certifications so that they can grow foods, USDA loans, those sorts of things to help them sort of to reduce the barriers to getting into that type of work. But I think one of the first steps is really increasing interest in that work through getting people out there on the land, growing food. Yeah, great question.
Alrighty, we have another question coming from online. So this person asked, many of the groups you mentioned are on their traditional homelands. How have you seen groups that have been removed from their traditional homelands reclaim their traditional foodways? Example, if our tribes are hundreds of miles away from our non-human relatives, how do we work towards restoring that relationship?
That is a really, really great question. And you're right, man. I feel like I'm going to go home and fix this slide deck now, because you're right. I didn't highlight that. So in particular, one community I'm familiar with is the Native Hawaiian community that's in Portland. They've done a lot of work to grow kalo on the continent, which is one of their traditional foods, and trying to restore that relationship as they're in a new place, introducing that plant relative there and connecting around that. The other thing that I think all of us are continuing to learn from is, as climate has changed, we're seeing plants move north and plants move south and animals move north and south. To give you a funny small example, there was a possum that tried to cross the Mackinac Bridge earlier this year, which possums don't exist in the UP. I would really love for them to, but they don't. And so like, again, animals are moving north and south as the climate is changing. And so trying to look to the communities that those plants existed in or those animals existed in, and looking to them for teachings and knowledge about how to be in good relationship with those plants and animals and how to care for them. So I think for communities that are living in different areas, potentially connecting with foods that maybe were not theirs and working with the communities that those foods were theirs, to learn from them and to learn from one another, but also potentially finding ways to see if their original plants and animals are willing to come live in their territories they live in now, kind of like that example I mentioned with growing kalo on the continent. Yeah, great question.
We have time for one more question in the room. Don't be shy.
I got one. Okay.
You said earlier we can ask you about the whitefish. What's your favorite whitefish?
Okay, great question. It's this random restaurant. So my family, my dad comes from like Nobbinway, which is kind of like a really small town in like the lower part of the Upper Peninsula. I consider Sault Ste. Marie like a super small town, and that's where I live now. He thought Sault Ste. Marie was like dangerous and scary, which like cracks me up because I'm like, oh my gosh, you had never been anywhere. But it's a little town that's even smaller than Nobbinway. So smaller than small. It's called Epiphet, and it's a restaurant called Moofin Fries. And they're a Sioux Tribe owned business, and they serve Sioux Tribe owned whitefish or Sioux Tribe harvested whitefish. And they make it with like pickles that are chopped up. So they're like super crunchy, and onions. And it is just so good. But they only sell like whitefish sandwiches. Like they have signs everywhere. They're like, we don't mess around. We sell whitefish sandwiches, fries, and ice cream. And like, don't ask us about anything else. We won't do it. And I respect people that like know their boundaries and their lane, and they're willing to do that. Yeah. There's a lot of great places to get healthier whitefish, but that's my favorite whitefish sandwich. Moofin Fries. Yeah. I wonder if that's my husband.
It's my husband. All right, so we have one more question online as well. And this participant asks, is there a policy in the USA regarding pollution that addresses protection for hunting and gathering for Indigenous communities?
Oh, that's a great question. Is there a policy in the U.S. that protects hunting and pollution? So there's some interesting ways tribes have been able to assert their treaty rights to protect against pollution. So for example, my own tribe, I don't remember what year it was, they opposed a limestone mine that was proposed in our area, and we were able to successfully oppose that mine and get it stopped because we sort of asserted that that mine would interfere with our treaty rights to be able to hunt, fish, and gather in those areas. And so there have been ways tribes have pushed back. There's also some things, Melissa would probably know better than I do, but in Minnesota, they've done a lot of really interesting things with some tribes recognizing the rights of wild rice as a living being, and then being able to assert that legally to, again, protect the interests of those plant relatives. So there's some interesting ones, a lot more to be done, and I think there's been some interesting things, like my tribe tried to sue the state of Michigan over the consent decree recently. It was like a whole thing. You'd have to ask somebody that's more familiar than I am. But again, really trying to get at the idea of like, should states be stocking non-Indigenous species of fish in our waters when our Indigenous species are suffering? So again, there's some interesting things that I think could come up in future years and could be sort of a method to protect against some of these environmental harms. Yeah, but I'm not super familiar with that area, but those are some of the examples I've heard.
Thank you so much, Tara.
You're welcome.
Let's switch places. Tara, go. All right. I am hungry. Oh, I'm talking with two mics. Okay, here we go. Thank you, Tara. I feel like I learn something every time you present. So yeah. And I will take those zucchinis from you. I love zucchinis. Yeah. All right, folks. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and get into our food demonstration with my new Mohawk relative, Chef Joe Haber. I'll leave it to Chef to introduce himself and share a bit of why he's here with us today. Little hint, food?
Oh, hold on.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Joseph Haber. I'm chef, owner, and operator of a small little catering and private dining business called Tomahawks. And my focus at the restaurant is to explore the traditional flavors and cooking techniques of my Mohawk roots, my family's foods that were, for most of my life, not present for me. I didn't grow up eating Mohawk food. I didn't know what that meant, except for we had one dish. We had a boiled cornbread. It was my grandmother's boiled cornbread. It's a very classic Mohawk boiled cornbread. And aside from that, it was not a present thing in my life. So this has been an endeavor in exploring all of these traditional foods and reconnecting back with where I came from. I come from a long line of Mohawk ironworkers and Mohawk nurses. My grandmother was one of the first nurses to come off of a Ganawake reservation, and her and my grandfather moved to Brooklyn to start their family and help build the great city, New York City. I mean, it's an incredible thing, and I wouldn't be here today without the hard work and sacrifices that so many people had before me. So I thank you all for being here. I'm honored to be able to talk with you right now and show you the things that I've learned. And like Tara said, we are all connected. It's insane to me that anybody would even briefly think that we're not. And I'm honored to be a cook in that connection. As a cook, we get to sit like right in the middle of all of it. You can't do all of this. You can't do all of it by yourself. When you really get into the nitty-gritty of what it means to be able to do something well, you can really only focus your energy in a couple of places, and that leaves you extremely deficient in other places. And all that does is show you how important community is around you. So we really do need each other. And so in keeping with that theme, I'm going to start to show you some actual real practical ways of working with these ingredients to cook some incredibly nourishing foods. So we're going to make a cedar mushroom dish and a little salad, a harvest salad at the end here. And I really love this dish because nobody ever showed me this dish. Nobody ever taught me how to cook these mushrooms. I've actually never been really formally taught how to cook at all. I'm an X-ray tech by trade. It turns out I didn't like heights, and actually I tried nursing school and I failed out of that promptly. And so I found myself still in the medical field, and I learned how to take X-rays. I was fascinated by the human body, and practiced actually here in Randallstown at Northwest Hospital for a number of years, and did truly love that profession. But I found food, and these, without having been taught how to do it, I just love it. And what happens is I find myself, you start to just listen and pay attention to what all your ingredients are telling you. Again, like they are non-human relatives, and they speak to us in so many ways if you're just quiet enough to listen. And again, cooking, you get to be intimately involved with with all of these other pieces of life. And so this dish is just a manifestation of what makes sense to do with what you have around you. And the real centerpiece of the whole thing is this liquid here is bean broth. It's like the liquid that you get from cooking a pot of beans. And this ingredient was like mildly confusing for me, and it is, I think, for a lot of people. I see this get dumped down the drain more often than not. People really don't know what to do with this, but the moment you just sit with it or you refuse to waste it, all of a sudden the world opens up to you, right? So it turns out it's like one of the most flavorful vegan cooking stocks, vegetable broth you could have at your disposal. And all you have to do is put beans in water and simmer them for a while, like super simple. So the first thing that we're going to do, though, before we get started with any of that, is just break down some of these alliums here. So I like to use any amount of whatever kind of oniony thing that you have around. We're starting like very, very basic, right? So I have a leek here, some scallions, and if you had onions, shallots, whatever is around is more important than going out and trying to find just the right perfect thing, right? Like it doesn't food is so easygoing. It doesn't matter. You're going to make it again next week anyway, so don't worry. Don't worry about getting it exactly perfect. So for a leek, I like to just cut it down at the root end, and I'll just go all the way through the top, and then kind of just lay it flat like this. Sometimes they'll have like a leafy end that you can pull off there. And then I'll do another slice down that way, and then I'll come back actually this way. We're just going to get like a little dice on this to help cook it out into in our pan here. And so I like to say, it's so long as they're related to each other, they smell like each other, they look like each other, it's fine. And I also really like to try to highlight the idea of using variety when we're cooking, because I'm not trying to put it all on leeks, or put it all on onions, or put it all on one variety of mushroom. When you use variety, you spread the weight out across the whole, a larger surface, instead of it all coming hard down on one thing. And so I try to keep that theme a lot when I'm in the kitchen here. So I'm just going to run through some of these alliums and get them cooked down. And I have a little pan here. We'll build this whole thing in this saute pan. And the inspiration behind this, it'll kind of come together as like a gravy. And that was because of my grandmother's cornbread. So she would make this boiled cornbread, and it's kind of a unique dish. I don't see it around in that kind of similar way, where you have a cake of masa that's got red beans mixed into it, and then you drop it into water until it floats, simmer it until it floats. And that was so like not what I ever expected when you hear cornbread, or even when you're working with masa. But it's beautiful, and it's a great cooking technique to use with it. But she would then cut it up, and then she would sear a piece of beef off in a pan and use some water to deglaze the pan and make what my aunties would call like a greasy gravy, and that would go over cornbread. And so when reimagining what that could look like, I didn't want to use a piece of beef, and so I found myself reaching for mushrooms, and I needed that liquid, and that's where I found this bean broth. So just going to take some of these onions, and we'll toss them in here, and we'll let them get going. And just pardon my mess and a lack of extreme attention to detail like I normally have here, is I don't do too much cooking in front of a whole bunch of people like intently watching what I'm doing here. So just a little induction burner with this stainless steel pan, but any kind of like pan over any heat source, coals and cast iron, or just your regular pan on your electric stovetop at home, whatever. But we just want to sweat these onions out and let some of their sweetness come out here. And I'll start working some of these other scallions. So I like the scallion because they have so much to offer here. We'll use these white butt ends for the saute here, and then we'll keep the top greens for the end. They kind of like are telling you again like where they want to go and what they want to do here. So just run a knife through these. And us as chefs, we can get really caught up in having things be a very certain kind of way, and we were extremely detail oriented, and we like to make things, ultimately like to make it just right for everybody else out here, right? But what it can do, I find, is sometimes it can make it could be a little intimidating for other people to look and see, to go to the kitchen, oh, I have to do it like this, or I'm never going to be able to get it just like that. And again, it doesn't matter. Food it's so forgiving, and ultimately you're going to do it over and over again. That's why we have such a connection with food. It is like in the core. If we only had to eat once a week or like once a month or so, if we were snakes or whatever, it would be so different. Our whole lives would be completely different. But we have to eat every day. I mean, not only every day. Like if somebody's eating only once a day, you're like, what are you doing? Why you're on some kind of like, it's like constantly just living our lives between two meals, right? So it's really is a relationship that you're establishing with your food, with your community, with your ingredients. And like any relationship, like we would never look at a relationship with another person and be like, all right, I got that set. Don't have to worry about, giving this any time or attention on a regular basis. That's not how we treat each other. Or you're constantly like giving and taking with people in your lives. And are you okay? What else do you need? What can you do? I need help. It very much is a relationship. And just because this sage doesn't have like eyes and ears and speaks back to you in English doesn't mean that it doesn't still want to have all those same niceties that we give to each other. I'm working some sage into this. Sage is one of our, classic, it's one of the classic herbs that I work into our dishes all the time, one of our medicines. And I like to put it up front in the cooking process. Sometimes sage can be like a little pungent, especially if you're just like throwing it raw into an end product. But I find that if it goes in the front and it cooks out a little bit, it mellows out, it calms down. Again, listen to it. I mean, if you want something like punchy, sagey, go right ahead. It can do that. But you can really work it into your dishes a lot more if you just cook it out here in the beginning a little bit. And I start a lot of my dishes off like this now, is like some mixture of whatever alliums I've got and then some sage. That's like my, mirepoix or whatever the French people say for food. Okay, here, mushrooms. Okay, so we're gonna let that saute out here a little bit, and then we'll bring mushrooms in. So sometimes if I'm doing this in like a big batch, I'll roast these off, but just at home when you're doing something like this, you can go right in the pan. And we're just gonna break these up. I don't think I've cut a mushroom in like years now. You just break them up. They're fine. I'll take the stem. I actually quite like this. Again, like if you'll notice. Can you see? Wait.
Oh, do you want me to do the?
Yeah, watch this.
Hold on.
This is cool.
I'm sorry.
This is like one of my favorites. So if you like take this stem, right, and you press it, you'll find it's all like fibrous like this, right? It's meat. It looks like pulled meat, right? So like I'm not slicing that with a knife. I like that texture. It's nice. And then we're just gonna break that up. Look at these guys. These are beautiful. Just kind of bust them up, whatever makes sense, whatever they want to do. We're all happy to be here. Okay. Just like this, and we'll keep working these around. So this is a mix. I've got just like some oysters, some shiitake, and some regular like baby bellas. These aren't anything crazy. I didn't go out into the woods and forage whatever to bring them in here. Or there's like a little bit of, again, like food sits at this intersection of like dreaming and practicality. And so, yeah, you could dream up all this stuff, but when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of doing the thing, and I have to come in and feed a whole bunch of people, that's the reality of the situation. So you find a good quality ingredient, and I'm not going to, shun away good ingredients because they're not, from a certain kind of place or done a certain kind of way. And again, speaks to if the community, if there's a forager around, and there's plenty of times that there has been foragers around, or I've been able to find, some, like a chanterelle or something is nice, then it works out. But in lieu of that, what I'm doing here is, again, leaning on variety to help kind of distribute the weight to a handful of different places instead of just, taking out all of the chanterelles and being like, I need 100 pounds of chanterelles for this catering. When they're around and they're in season and that's what is needed, then you certainly can. So this is just a mix. And I also just like, as a cook, the variety of shapes and textures and things like this. It kind of reminds me of, the irregularity of what a pot roast looks like in a crock pot. It's all busted up, and this piece is bigger than that, and this one's really shreddy and fatty and what have you. So I'm just going to keep working in these mushrooms here. And once we have these in, we'll just let them kind of go for a bit to try to pick up some color. The real oh wow moment that I got to have with this dish then after I had made it a couple of times was that it's actually to even further push the idea that you don't need a recipe, and that honestly you probably even shouldn't. Once you've got your cooking legs under you and you're not super, a recipe is nice in the very beginning if you truly don't know what you're doing. And when I first started cooking, which wasn't until I was 20 and I was living on my own in X-ray school, unable to, eating my mom out of the house every time I would go home, and then wondering why food was such garbage when I went back to school and I found out, I need to start cooking for myself, is, hold on 1 second here, is that you really, you can really, a recipe is nice to get you up off the ground. You can do this, and then at the end, you get a lasagna, and you can eat a lasagna is nice. But once you've kind of got an idea of what you're up to, a recipe can almost be constraining to a degree. And what this dish is able to show us is that if you have whatever kind of mushroom that you want it to be, work it in. And then you can kind of combine that with whatever kinds of beans you've got. And then that's one of the real joys of me as a cook is there's hundreds of different versions of this. As far as, varieties of beans go, and then they each all have their own way that they cook. They've got their own broth that they produce, and each one of these stocks or broths will make a slightly different variation on this dish. So then you can really eat this or make this kind of dish all year long, and depending on what beans you're using and what mushrooms you have, it can keep changing its the way that it looks, its personality, each time that you make it. And that was really a really kind of wonderful thing to stumble into. I didn't come up with this. This is not my idea. This has been made before. I just kind of, happened upon it. So now that we kind of have these mushrooms kind of cooking out a little bit, they're starting to fall down some. Oh yeah, look at that, nice. Keep forgetting what's behind me here. I'm gonna rip this induction burner up to high. These things get also, if you're ever using an induction burner, these things are crazy powerful. So just kind of be aware of that. They can really do good, a lot of work. And for just plugs into an outlet somewhere, if you're, have not an ability to access a heat source all the time, or if you're in a place where you know, like on a farm where there's maybe an electrical outlet, but there is no working kitchen or something like that, this can help out. So then what we'll do here now is take this liquid and just kind of deglaze this pan here with it. And we're really going to kind of make it liquidy because we're going to reduce this broth down until it thickens a bit. And all of like the nice things from the beans are in this liquid too, and you'll see that it will really start to kind of come together here. There's also a so I haven't salted this dish at all yet, and as a cook, that's like very on my radar right now. Like, what are you doing? You got it. You want to season food as you go, but one of a pot of beans. If you're going to put salt anywhere, it's like in a pot of beans. They love to be well seasoned. You can really like make beans taste like almost like wow by getting your seasoning down. But then all that salt is left in this liquid, and so I find that I'm using that salt now in this broth to season the rest of this dish. So like we're not wasting even the salt. It's like it's all finding a home for us here. So we're gonna let that come up to a boil here. We'll start to reduce it down, and we'll just add now here. I have a little piece of cedar, and I find that this goes perfectly with this. So I'm just gonna lay this piece of cedar right in here too. Again, some medicines, and really basic, not a lot going on, but it's not for lack of flavor. What it will do is it's giving everyone room to speak here. So we're going to let this go. You can see that this is starting to come up to a boil, and I'm just going to let this rip like this. And we'll come back here and I'll poke it around with this spoon, and we'll just be watching for texture. So much of cooking is like looking for texture or trying to get a color. I like to really work backwards from a place, you know, you have something, a crispy, salty piece of skin from something, and it's like, okay, that's your destination, and it will inform you how to get there from behind. So we're looking for something that's like, you know, thicker, kind of gravy, stewy-like, and we're going to put this over some. Hominy, some Six Nations white corn that I have out in the back there. Can we see this? So this would be the variety of corn, and it's delicious. I'll have it here in a second. Since we're going to go over hominy with this, I'll leave it like kind of like a medium thickness. Sometimes I'll take this and I'll grind it down into a flour and I'll cook like a traditional corn mush. And if that's the case, I'll leave this like a bit thinner, so it kind of like helps kind of cut into the mush. If I've put this into a taco before, just cook it until it's like almost, it will thicken to a point where it's like sticky and like almost formal, and then it makes a great vegan filling for a taco or inside a tamal or any other kind of like corn related application here. So I do have a little bit, couple varieties of corn, and I'm gonna show you just kind of, again, in effort to talk about or to highlight about listening to your food and just watching what happens with it, or listening to what it's trying to tell you. So we'll almost always nixtamalize the corn that we're working with. So we're gonna take the corn and put it into a bath of water, and that water just needs to have its pH raised higher than like the neutral pH of water. So traditionally what we'll do is use the ashes from a hardwood fire to achieve that pH. Again, super basic. We're talking about like, water and ashes from a fire and a whole grain. But it's undeniable the magic that goes on when you do this kind of thing. You'll never wonder how people didn't like it. It's well obvious. You'll see here that when you mix these ingredients together, that something quite magical was going on, right? So this will take just a second, but I just have this corn in this just regular water, and I'm just going to add some of these ashes to it. This is slightly different than the way I would do it if I was going to actually nixtamalize the corn, but it's going to just kind of bring the idea to life. This will take a little bit, just a minute or two, for this change to start to happen, and so we'll let that hang out. And in the meantime, then we're going to move on down this way, and we're going to kind of build this harvest salad and autumn salad here to highlight even more of our bounty that we've got this time of year. It's one of the best times of year to be eating, especially where we are. And we have beans and corn here on the table, so I'm always trying to work in Three Sisters if I can. I do truly believe in that idea, kind of gloss over. Everyone knows Three Sisters. Oh yes, Three Sisters. But it's just so incredible to me, the synergy that these three pieces of life have with each other, have with the earth, and have with us and our biology also. It's incredible how nourishing and how well they can take care of us. And all also storable dried ingredients too. I mean, you can store the dried beans and dried corn, for years at a time in your pantry, especially if you're not trying to use them as seed, but if they're just for food. And even a winter squash, we'll get butternuts or other kinds of winter squash at, end of August, September, harvested around. And I've put them in my pantry and not got to the last one until April or May of the next year. And they're still fine. I mean, maybe they're a little soft on the inside, but I mean, if you put an apple or a grape, I mean, if you put anything else in your pantry, any other fruit, it's just, I don't know, that's crazy. That's crazy. Non-refrigerated foods that can be stored for long periods of time. Our communities are healthy and strong with these ingredients, behind us. So it's all to say we'll get some squash into here. So I just have some. Oh, thank you. A bed of greens here we'll lay down, and again, not a recipe, but kind of an idea that I like to work in with doing a salad is I'll try to do something cooked, something raw, and something pickled maybe. That's a good way of kind of getting yourself off the ground to put something together. Or if you're in the store and you're I don't know what to do, or what am I supposed to, or you get from the garden, I've got all of this stuff, and it's what do I do with all of it? Well, maybe this is can inform a little bit of direction, right? So just kind of throws a bed of greens down here, and I'll take some of these radishes. Tara is so fond of. Do you want to try? Here.
God bless.
I'm going first. These are raw sliced radishes, so this is my raw, and I'm going with these first because they're white, and so they're going to provide. Salads are on their own beautiful. They're just a highlight of so many ingredients in such a natural way, and a white radish is going to be a nice backdrop for the rest of the colors that we have going on in here. So I'll kind of just tuck all these around, and all I'm ever doing is somebody told me once, I used to really struggle with where do I put it all? How do I make it look nice or whatever? And you're filling in negative space. like the bed of greens is it's like, you know, now you have a canvas and these radishes are just going to help add like, you know, a backdrop, and we're just going to keep tucking in all of these other things around the negative spaces that we're creating here. So some radishes. Now I have some roast squash. So here's my cooked. And same thing. We'll just go around and just kind of let them fall around. Not got get in the way too much here. And then lastly, I have some cranberries here. And I pickled these cranberries, which was something that I tried last year and it worked out really well. Just in another ingredient we get this time of year, or a little earlier, is we have a ton of grape juice. Fresh pressed grape juice comes online this time of year. And so I took these cranberries and just covered them in grape juice and a little bit of red wine vinegar. It seemed like the natural, you know, other side of the grape juice. And brought it all just to a simmer with some maple syrup, and then cut the heat just to a simmer. Otherwise, you'll make cranberry sauce, which we're all very familiar with. But if you just do it like just cook them lightly, they still maintain their beautiful like little orb shape, and they're just like little bursty pockets of sweet and sour. So that's our raw, our cooked, our pickled, and then I'll throw a few some pumpkin seeds here in on the end. They're really savory and nice. You'll find that they'll be like the last thing that will be left as you're eating the salad. It'll be like you're crunching on, finishing out those pumpkin seeds, and they leave just like a really nice savoriness to the salad. And then I just have some fried garlic here. This was a product of making this dressing that we have, and a lot of really nice garlic this time of year also. It loves the cooler temperatures. And so I took some of this and I just like gently cooked it in some sunflower oil until it started to fry out, and then used that oil then to make a base of this dressing here, which is just like a sweet onion and garlic dressing. Some apple cider vinegar and some maple syrup. So we'll just do that on top, and then that's your harvest salad. So then, oh, thank you very much. So we'll come back over here now and check out our mushrooms. Oh yeah. So I'm getting like a little scrapey action on the bottom here. And we're starting to thicken up some. Can still see like some green in this cedar, that like bright green. So I know that I'm not quite there yet. It will dull out some and get like a little bit more gray when it's at the spot that I want, but that's perfect. This is still like a little, you can see like it's still a little liquidy. So we'll let that keep going. I will add some maple syrup to this. Aside from the idea of like, when you're working flavor, if you're going to add salt to something, you can, and you want to add salt to things because it's going to, especially in the modern day, like our palates are adjusted for that. If I don't put salt in something and I feed it to you, you're going to think that it tastes bland and you're going to think I'm a bad cook, regardless of whatever else I did. Now, is that right or wrong? I don't know, but that's the way that we are right now. And there's well, that's another conversation, I guess I should say. but you want to add salt. Now, you can only add so much salt before it gets to be too salty, and then you think I'm a bad cook. So I'm like, okay, it has to be balanced. But you'll find that if you add a little sweetness too, and maybe not a perceivable amount of sweetness, but then I can add a little bit more salt because it's helping balance out the game. So it's not bad to add a little sweetness to something, but the real reason I'm adding this in is actually because of the mushrooms. And I know that mushrooms like sugar because they will, well, their mycelium are all on coat the roots of trees, right? And they'll uptake all sorts of nutrient and minerals and things from the soil that the tree can't take for itself. And it will give that nutrient, like zinc and other things, to the tree. And in turn, what does the tree give back to the mycelium? Sugar water, right? So they love it. So it just makes sense here. So we're pretty much there. So this could take me 1 or 2 minutes past my allotted time here to get me the exact thickness that I'm looking for, but that's pretty much where we're at. And I'm going to leave this bowl of food, this bowl of corn out here. Maybe I'll put it back in the back when we're all going to go through to eat some food here. I hope that I'm making everyone hungry. That's like that's the most secret ingredient to any recipe, you guys, is like make people, if you're hungry, it's all going to taste really good. You'll find, what I want to really like highlight with this is there's like an insane color change that goes on when you nixtamalize corn, that like this corn, you can see it's like how yellow that is. This started as white, and just from being in this water, it's telling you like this is magic. Like why is this not the same color anymore? This is like something special is happening. And just to kind of further highlight the idea, listen to your food, think of your ingredients not just as your ingredients, but like other pieces of life that are in turn giving you life, and that you can't go forward in time without your relationships to them. So, thank you very much. Okay.
Wow, Chef, thank you so much.
I'm gonna
I hear
just
Abby's
turn that
stomach
off there.
growling from here.
I'm so hungry. Yeah. Welcome to our afternoon portion, which will be a bit shorter and no less exciting. We're really thrilled to keep the momentum going. I'm going to introduce a few of the Bloomberg American Health Initiative students, fellows, who do work in Indigenous food systems for health spaces. Oh, there we go. And we have pictures of some of them. So we're going to have what we're calling lightning talks. We've used this in a few of our other programs. So very brief bursts of information from the fellows that you see listed here. So first, you're going to hear a presentation from Dr. Jeffrey Wells, whose picture is showing up on the screen. Dr. Wells is a proud Chickasaw Nation citizen and is a current Bloomberg Fellow in the MPH program. He's a physical therapist. He serves as the Chickasaw Nation Director of Public Health, and I know they're doing amazing food sovereignty work there that I'm sure we'll hear about. He also acts as a specialty clinician addressing pediatric obesity in a stage 3 weight management clinic called Empowered Living. And he's doing a lot of things. I've been working with him a little bit on his practicum and capstone work, and wears many, many hats beyond those that we've listed here. So we'll get to hear a little bit from Dr. Wells. Then we get to hear from our friends at the Hawaii Good Food Alliance, and these are wonderful folks as well. So this is a collaborating organization with the Bloomberg American Health Initiative, and there's 2 fellows housed at the Hawaii Good Food Alliance. One is a brand new student this year, Lucas McKinnon, who's the managing director for the organization, and he leads statewide efforts in Hawaii to integrate food systems transformation with public health, environmental resilience, which is an important cross-cutting topic, and equity. Yes, equity, friends. Mr. McKinnon is, as I mentioned, currently a fellow and in the DRPH program, and works with Jordan Smith, who some of you may know because Jordan's been around as a fellow as well. And Jordan is leading up the Food as Medicine program at the Alliance and leads efforts to drive policy and systems change, ensuring that all people of Hawaii, especially Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders and those who've been and are continued to be marginalized, have access to nourishing locally grown foods, which is wonderful. In today's video, we're also going to get to hear from the wonderful Kaiulana Odom, who has come to a couple of events, including the Native Nutrition Conference, and she's the executive director and a powerful leader across the islands in Hawaii. And then last but not least, we'll hear from Bloomberg Fellow Livy Lewis, who serves as co-director on the Wind River Reservation Food Sovereignty Project. And Livy will be joined in the presentation by fellow co-director Kelly Pingree of the Shoshone Bannock tribe. Super amazing. This will be video. So all of us online or in person will have the same experience. And I'm going to try to press some buttons and make it work. So hang tight.
Chokma, I'd like to begin by telling you a story about me whenever I was a child. I grew up in South Central Oklahoma knowing that I was a part of the Chickasaw Nation. The reason that I knew that was because I carried a card that told me that I was Chickasaw. But whenever I interacted with my grandparents, they would share that we should be proud that we're Chickasaw, that we're First American. But I wasn't taught a lot about our roots, about our culture. My grandpa and I would go on walks in the forest. He may tell me the Chickasaw word for squirrel. We would walk through his garden and he would tell me about different plants. Several years later, my grandpa passed away. And it wasn't until after he passed away that I started getting much more interested in my Chickasaw culture, as well as traditional food knowledge and traditional food pathways. Unfortunately, the renaissance, my personal renaissance of my culture came too late to understand what I missed as an opportunity to ask my grandfather questions. And the same can be said about the opportunity missed about his knowledge about traditional food pathways. What I found out is that as I looked on social media platforms is that he was actually well known in the Chickasaw Nation for growing certain types of corn and giving heritage corn to other citizens and teaching them about gardening. And it hit me that not only didn't I know that he was such a valuable resource, but I had lost that resource at a time whenever I was really wanting to get back to my roots. I don't think that my story is very different than a lot of other people's. And for the Indigenous people, food connects us to our culture, to our heritage, to one another. And yet over the generations, much of our knowledge, our traditional food pathways, they've been displaced by modern systems that prioritize convenience and connection. My name's Jeffrey Wells. I'm a part-time Master's of Public Health student at Johns Hopkins. I also serve the Chickasaw people as the Director of Public Health. And I'm excited to talk to you about some of the opportunity that I've had to expand my knowledge and serve my people because of some of the work that I've done here at Johns Hopkins University. I want to give you a little bit of context about the Chickasaw people. We were originally in this area that's shaded red on the right here, that Mississippi area. But because of the Indian Removal Act of 1830, Congress gave the federal government power to exchange tribal homelands for land in Indian territory. And the Chickasaw people were displaced and started a 500-mile journey to what is now South Central Oklahoma that's highlighted in the green area on the map on the left. That removal was more than just a loss of land. It was a loss of natural food pathways that had been there for generations. The Chickasaw people had to learn new plants. They had to learn new methods, new hunting, new gathering, new planting, because what they grew in Mississippi didn't completely translate to Oklahoma. As we fast forward to the Chickasaw Nation now, we are a strong people. We are unconquered. We are unconquerable. But the food pathways still have never completely recovered. In fact, our food systems have shifted. It's not just the Chickasaw culture, but the American culture has shifted our traditional food pathways to prioritize convenience. Today, the normal part of my work is very broad. It's more about strategic leadership in our public health division. But something that I have become very passionate about as I have chosen the focus area of food systems is the intersection of food sovereignty with tribal sovereignty, with health equity in tribal communities. My focus area in my practicum is exploring the indigenous food knowledge and knowledge sharing, how elders and families and communities sustain traditional knowledge, share that traditional knowledge despite that modern disruption. And at the same time, my work examines how modern food systems, often governed by external policies, can inadvertently limit tribal autonomy and health. My work with Johns Hopkins seeks to identify ways of traditional and contemporary food systems and how they can coexist to create healthier, more culturally grounded families and communities. For tribal nations, food sovereignty is tribal sovereignty, because food sovereignty is the right of a people to feed themselves in ways that honor their culture, sustain their land, and strengthen their sovereignty. And when our people have the freedom to decide what to eat, how we hunt, how we grow the food, how we share that food, we reclaim something that is very vital, our right to live well as Chickasaw people. This work impacts not only our physical well-being, but spiritual and cultural connectedness. And when we return to traditional food pathways, when we return to stories and ceremonies and values that nourish us, we're nourishing more than our body. And that ripple effect is profound. Families becoming healthier, communities becoming more resilient, and the next generation grows up with a stronger sense of who they are and who they can be. So as I've grown into the world of food sovereignty, my approach has been both academic and relational. Through Johns Hopkins and my practicum project, my capstone, I've partnered with local and tribal programs that are already doing a lot of work to help me understand our local context more thoroughly. As I continue working, I plan to conduct interviews and literature reviews and observe how cultural values are being woven into public health practice here within the Chickasaw Nation. And the aim isn't just to study these systems, but to help strengthen the bridges between traditional knowledge keepers and modern health infrastructure. Even within the Chickasaw Nation, I have started to see subtle but meaningful change. Conversations about traditional food systems are happening more often across departments, in planning meetings, and even in family kitchens. There's a growing awareness that returning to traditional food pathways is not a step backward, but it's a step towards wholeness. And we're still early in this journey. And I would say that we're probably in the contemplation or preparation phase of behavioral modification, but our momentum is building. Programs that are beyond my purview are taking action, increasing access to traditional food, supporting local producers, investing in community gardens. We're talking about seed sharing and distribution programs and getting elders involved in being able to share the stories that tell us of our history, to show us how to be successful. And each of these initiatives reinforce a larger shift towards sovereignty and health. Looking ahead, if there's one lesson I've learned, it's this: that food isn't just a health intervention, but it's a cultural restoration. And my vision is clear. I want a future where my children, first Americans, are healthier because we've returned to a more natural and traditional food, supported by systems that make those choices accessible, sustainable, and respected. Because true food sovereignty honors the sacred relationship between people and land and culture. And when we nurture those relationships, we strengthen our sovereignty, our identity, and our health as a nation. In public health, we often talk about going upstream, addressing the root. For me, it's not just about going upstream. It's about getting back to our roots, both literal and symbolically. The answers to many of our modern challenges lie in the wisdom of our ancestors, in the soil beneath our feet, in the stories that we passed on around the table. And if we can restore that connection, one meal, one garden, one hunting trip, one story at a time, then we won't just be feeding our people, we'll be restoring a healthy way of life. And I invite you to join me as we go back to our roots and we reclaim our traditional food knowledge, our healthy way of living, and who we are as a people. Thank you.
Aloha and welcome to Hawaii Good Food Alliance. O Wau o Ka'iolani Odom, and I am the Executive Director of Hawaii Good Food Alliance. Our alliance is 8 organizations that engage in the production, aggregation, and distribution of food and the practice of Malama Aina to rebuild thriving community food systems. This is our founding circle, the 8 organizations, and on the bottom are the projects that we are currently engaged in. The Regional Food Business Center was a big project of ours and has recently terminated, but it was put in place to assist farmers, producers, and aggregators to get their product to market. The Bucks, our Double Up program, was our very first program of Hawaii Good Food Alliance. Aiaola, Food is Medicine, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Kuina Ai, Kui is to sew a lea, na is plural, and I is food. So we're sewing together a lei of all of the food hubs, producers, aggregators, and into getting food out into the community. And our other program is our REACH program, where we are helping to get WIC into farmers market and food hubs. All of our programs are founded in these 5 good food pillars: cultural grounding. Food is a direct connection to our spirituality, culture, community heritage, and to each other. Food is medicine. Good food provides a strong foundation for the health and well-being of individuals and communities. Equity. Everyone deserves easy and reliable access to nutritious food as a matter of fairness, equity, and social justice. Community-based, sharing aloha and knowledge along with building capacity supports community abundance. We believe here at HGFA that the community is our smallest unit of measurement when it comes to health. Malama Aina. Our relationship with land is one of reciprocity, not ownership. We care for Aina, and so it provides. In the Hawaiian language, ai is food, na is a pluralization. So we recognize that it is the land which feeds us, and that our relationship is that of one of caring for each other. Food is Medicine reflects the deep connection between food, Aina, and health. For many Indigenous cultures, this is not a new concept. It is something that we knew from a long, long time ago. And so as we are working with Food is Medicine in today's lens, it is very important to us that we keep our cultural components, our wisdom, our knowledge, our practices as part of the program that we are providing and developing. This is a Food is Medicine Nutrition Supports Pyramid. What's on the top of the pyramid is what you usually see: the groceries, the meals, the protein boxes. And on the bottom is what we have added, which is empower our local farmers, our mahiai, and that we are accountable to our Aina, to our land. If we make decisions thinking about the land that needs to feed us for generations to come, what are the ways that our decisions are different than if we just think about making money off of the land? Who's going to benefit? Our whole community is going to benefit, from the land to the people to those that are battling chronic disease, food insecure households, the farmers, the food hubs, our economy. We need to keep it all within our system, and especially our land and our ecosystem. We also have cultural components to all of our programs. This is our Aha Ipono, where we gather in Ahupua'a. Ahupua'a are our land divisions from the mountain to the sea. We bring back in the cultural wisdom, the knowledge, the skills, the practice, the practitioners, and bring them all together so we can talk about the food systems from a deep and intentional Indigenous knowledge. This was our first one at Palihua. We also have had them in Waimanalo and Waianae, and it's important that our ceremony and protocol are part of all that we offer, that we bring the best when we bring ceremony and protocol. So if we start with this, we remind ourselves of all of the excellence that is within our knowledge and within our culture. It's also important that as we gather to talk, that we are forming circles, and it's not about a panel of experts telling the audience about their knowledge, but it's really all of us sharing on an equal level, all of our experiences, all of our knowledge, all of our practices that have been passed down. We want to support and empower each other as we move forward. Mahalo for visiting Hawaii Good Food Alliance, and thanks for listening.
Thank you for inviting us to be here today. My name is Livy Lewis, and I'm a Bloomberg Fellow in the Food Systems for Health track.
I'm Kelly Pingree, co-director of the Wind River Food Sovereignty Project, our collaborating organization. We're honored to be here with you today to share our story. The vision of the Wind River Food Sovereignty Project is a vibrant, self-sustaining food system on the Wind River Reservation, designed and led by the community members. Our mission is to increase the supply of fresh, healthy food on the reservation by supporting food production buying for the community. The project began in 2018 and grew out of conversations among local health programs about improving access to healthy foods on the Wind River Reservation, which is located in central Wyoming and home to the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes. While many discussions focused on adding healthier options to food banks, few addressed the root causes or long-term solutions needed to transform our food system. So we asked ourselves, how do we increase the supply of healthy food on the reservation? How do we make our food chains resilient to disruptions like those seen during COVID-19? How do we overcome transportation barriers across the 2.2 million acre reservation with only one grocery store, 3 convenience stores, 3 casino restaurants? How do we move away from dependence on off-reservation stores? And finally, how do we do this within the framework of traditional and cultural values?
Our programs aim to achieve these goals. After 4 years of trying to lease land, we finally acquired a new 30-acre site, the Trout Creek Demonstration Farm. We now host a small acreage vegetable farm, youth land-to-school learning garden, elder healing garden, pumpkin patch, and food forest. We host workshops like beginning gardening, soil health, and food preservation, and the site serves as a home base for our land-based work, a place for school groups, youth programs, health initiatives, and community gatherings, as well as a place to offer irrigated land to food producers who otherwise do not have access. At Trout Creek Farm, our goal is to produce substantial amounts of healthy food and keep that food in the community. Within 5 years, we aim to grow enough food to connect to local markets and institutions, including farmers markets, retail outlets, casino restaurants, and especially our local school districts. We believe that getting fresh, healthy food into schools is one of the most powerful ways to support the health of our youth. One of our major initiatives is a farm-to-school program focused on helping reservation schools increase traditional and Indigenous foods in their school meals. As part of this USDA-funded project, our staff is working with school food service directors to develop standardized recipes using Indigenous foods, training school nutrition professionals on processing, preserving, and sourcing these foods, and letting the kids offer feedback on recipes. Here you can see some of our sophisticated data collection with first and second graders. Learning what kids would like to eat and what schools would like to serve will also inform what we grow at Trout Creek Farm, as well as what Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho food producers we work with could grow to sell to the school districts. One of our cornerstone programs is a producer support program to help Native producers create or expand viable businesses and get their locally produced food into the community and reservation economy. In collaboration with our local community development financial institution and with funds from the Native American Ag Fund, we've distributed 55 small grants to Native-owned food and agriculture businesses, including ranchers and community producers such as growers, harvesters, fishers, egg producers, and beekeepers. In addition to direct financial support, producers get individualized support that could include mentorship with experienced producers, marketing assistance, or help with storage and transportation. We see our role as simply connecting people to resources. Most of the community members we work with already have expertise. They simply need financial resources, soil, seeds, or startup funds to start growing. While we value education and technical assistance, it's crucial to talk about and address the lack of access to capital for Native producers. This program has been remarkably successful simply by filling that gap. Looking ahead, we're continuing to build out Trout Creek Farm as a community hub. Within the next 5 years, we plan to add a commercial kitchen and food hub to process, store, and package locally produced food. This will help small producers sustain viable businesses and supply local institutions such as schools, senior centers, and grocery stores. The kitchen will also serve as a teaching space for culinary classes featuring local and traditional foods. Our hope is that the community will see the farm as their own, a place for gathering, learning, and creating lasting change in how food is grown, shared, and celebrated on the Wind River Reservation.
As we work towards food sovereignty, we are also working towards community health, resilience, and self-determination. As Native people, we give thanks for the food that Mother Earth provides. When we connect with our food, we reconnect with our land, our ancestral knowledge, our spirituality, and our prayer, in time, in place, in a healing way. Everything we do through this project is about building a better future for our children and for all who share this world with us. We are so grateful for the opportunity to connect with the Center for Indigenous Health at Johns Hopkins. We hope to continue as a collaborating organization with the Bloomberg Fellows program, and we thank you for the opportunity to share with you today.
Those were just a few of the fellows featured, all very moving videos. They did such an amazing job. If you're online, everyone, you had the room riveted. But as you see listed on the screen here, we have more fellows to acknowledge. So I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, Josh Sharfstein alluded to this. We at the Center for Indigenous Health reached out to the Bloomberg American Health Initiative and said, we need more Indigenous fellows. This is not going to cut it. And we wrote a little proposal for, you know, this collaboration, this effort to do more outreach and recruitment, and in turn that the center would become a place where Indigenous fellows could engage with our training team who you've met today and the various programs that the center offers. And I would say the fruits of that labor are starting to show, as you can see from the names of the current fellows even now. Shane, who's in the room here with us, shows up. When we invite him to various reservations and tribal health events, he's there. I know he's been at least 2 in 1 month, or in a span of a couple of months. And so all of you online, we recognize you, all of those yet to come on in. Applications are due December 1st, I believe, for the Bloomberg American Health Initiative. I am someone who is glad to write letters of support for folks who I can get to know very quickly before December 1st. So please reach out to me. And just miigwech, huge thanks to the amazing and inspiring work that you all are doing. At the beginning of this event today, I got a little dark, as I tend to do. But I promised you some hope, and I see that we're feeling that. I can feel the energy in the room shift. Okay, so with that, we're at the end of formal programming, but we have just, I think, a few minutes for reflections if anyone wants to share. And I think some of you can see comments online. So we do have a microphone person. Does anyone want to share any sort of, we can't really ask questions of the folks, but any reflections, any thoughts, any teachings that are resonating with you after the nourishment you received today?
Oh, we've got one.
Oh, let's get you a microphone.
Like you said, not like necessarily a question as much as just a statement of the, with the lightning talks that we just saw, just happy to see how practical everything is and like really like rubber meets the road. Like this is what we're doing. And because so much of this can be like forever living in this idea space, but to like, and especially as a cook, like that's my life, is like taking ideas and then making it real. And that's such a hard place to be sometimes. So I was just really blown away by how like practical everything really is, and the real like coming to life that it's taking. So I just want to say that.
Thank you, Chef. All right, we have another one.
Hi, hello. Oh, hello. Okay. Well, my name's Chelsea. I'm a second-year MSPH student, and during my second year, I'm doing a field placement, and one of my field placements is with the Center for Indigenous Health. So I came here today just to honestly learn and just take in this wonderful experience as I'm nearing my end of the program in May. I come from a state-recognized tribe, Halawassaponi in North Carolina, and so today, lunch, I complimented our wonderful chef. It felt like a taste of home for me living here in Baltimore for the past year and a half. My Grammy, she grows collards. I grew up harvesting our crops with her, so that was really, really nice just to hear and see that today. Also, I was talking with my friend Aaliyah and classmate that she just went to the APHA. I won't share her experience, but we just shared a sentiment of we don't see a lot of other people representing Indigenous, ITOs, and things like that. So it makes me really hopeful to see all the work that we're doing, and also just personally coming from, like I said, a state-recognized tribe who doesn't have access to federal resources and programs. Just knowing that, okay, we're doing well. You know, we're taking advantage of the resources that we do have and keeping our culture alive, even though so much of it has been lost. So I've just overall had a very heartwarming and informative experience. So I'm super thankful for events like this.
Yeah, Chelsea. Okay.
Hi, my name is Epifania. I'm currently staff at the Homewood campus. I just wanted to say, like, all the programming that the center puts on, I think is incredible. Like Dr. Walls was kind of mentioning, it's like trying times for everybody, and I think it's great to see that in all the things that are happening, like good work is continuing to happen and will continue to happen. I think it's very inspiring as like a young person to see that you can get in and be helpful and support like on all forms. So I think that it's great, and I think it's super inspiring where like allyship comes in, where people in one population do all this work, and it's inspiring for others, where it's like, how can we take the good work that you're doing in one area and then apply it somewhere else and like all over the world. So I think it's great. Thank you so much for putting this on.
Yeah, thank you. What else, guys? All right, now it's time for the comedy segment. Just kidding.
Our interpretive dance that won't be filmed and no one online can see it. So Yurdumarang. Hello, my name is Faye McMillan. I would like to Yinjmaran Munramang, which is acknowledge the traditional lands that I am standing on as a guest to these, and start by thanking Uncle Ron for welcoming us today to this space and starting us in a good way. And then sharing what I've heard over the last few hours is relational. The context of being in relation to someone or someplace. It's exceptionally important that we heard from Tara through the keynote that we aren't an ancient peoples. Indigenous peoples have ancient histories, but are contemporary societies. We are recognizing and honoring our ancestors, doing the work for the future generations that will continue to share our knowledge systems with the world, and in doing so, create those relations and the gift that many Indigenous cultures extend to everyone, which is, please join us. Please sit at our table, talk to us. We all want the same thing. We want to be in a world where people feel nourished, both spiritually and physically. And then that took us to Chef Joe. Again, that touch of home, that sense of nostalgia that food brings us, which is why so many Indigenous cultures use food as a way that levels us all together, that honors our elders, but brings in that space to say, we all need to eat. Let's do that together. And then we get in, we clean up, and we go to the next. And we were so fortunate to hear through our lightning talks, and as Joe pointed out, the very practical things that our communities are doing. There's a thing called the Nike approach, just do it. So many Indigenous communities are just doing it. They're getting on and they're doing the work that their community is not only asking for, but is saying, this is what we need. So when we listen to our community, the solutions are there. They are asking us to say, how can we do this together? And how can we do this in relationships? I want to acknowledge that the Center in 2022 changed its name to the Center for Indigenous Health to recognize those relationships across oceans, across lands, across time, to make those connections to now Aotearoa, Australia, Canada, and the many other Indigenous nations beyond that the Centre is forming relationships with, recognizing our shared histories, but also our shared solutions, our shared strength, and our ability to find strength and be resilient. We heard in our last lightning talk, even though there have been attempts to change the way we stand and face the wind, we still do it every day with grace and with humbleness that we get to be part of the journey. So I cannot believe what an amazing gift we all got to share together today, to not only hear from people that have taken some very philosophical up here sort of questions and made them very practical, made them things that people can see and believe in. And then we got to share food. I got to see plates piled high, people sitting at tables having conversations with people that they hadn't yet met, that you'll leave today with one new friend or maybe more. But we are here, we are doing the work. So the education and training team, I do want to acknowledge the education and training team for putting this on. But not just that, the relationship across other parts of the centre that really brought beauty and grace to this. So I do hope as you leave today that you put your coat on, because for a girl from Australia, this is getting really chilly. Put your coat on, but please go out, share your smile, share your grace, and know that every day you are a gift that this world needs. Keep doing the work that you are doing, and I thank you so much. Nagiri Dunyal Dalang. Until we meet again, thank you.
I can see the comments. I'm excited to see everybody's words. Folks, this concludes our gathering today. May we carry forward the spirit of today's gathering, connection, learning, and commitment to Indigenous food sovereignty and health. Everyone safe travels, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Yeah, guys.